William Goldman. I was the screenwriter on A Bridge Too Far a long time ago. I've been very lucky in the movies I've done in that I've only done movies I've wanted to do. That's not dealing with movies that I've doctored, because doctoring movies is about craft. But when I read the Ryan book, the great thing about the Ryan book was it was a disaster for the Allies. If it had been a standard World War II story where John Wayne drags the poor but cuddly Americans to victory up the hill, I would have not done it, because I hate those movies. There were so many screw-ups by everybody on this, from the Germans to the Brits to the, I mean, we came out pretty well. The Americans did pretty well. I mean, it was if anybody was heroic in the sense of a plan going the way it was supposed to, it was our part of Market Garden, but it was a disaster. And the disaster of it, and the fact that Mr. Levine wanted to do a depressing story, and we must never forget this, he was spending his money. He was not a studio. He was the only one then that did it, and no one does it now. Levine asked me to read it. I met with Attenborough. We had, I think, a bad meeting in England in which he got the impression, I think, that I didn't want to do it, and I think he thought I had the impression I didn't want him to do it. Now, Attenborough at this point had done two movies, a great movie, Oh, What a Lovely War, and then a terrific flick, Young Winston, both of which were flops. And that Levine gave him this giant thing is amazing. Attenborough was already passionate about Gandhi. And I think the theory, I'm not sure on this, but I think Levine was going to do Gandhi next if this worked, blah, blah, blah. I've never had an experience like this. I've never felt such pressure. Levine had it in his head, for some mad reason, that we were going to open on a certain date. And counting backwards, I don't know why he had that in his head. Maybe he had luck with that date before. But counting backwards, we had to finish shooting by X and we had to start shooting by Y. We had to start shooting, I'm going to say by May in Holland, because you had to shoot in Holland because that's where the bridges were. And there was no way, if my script stunk and they hated it, or if they liked the script, it was too late. They had to start building before they had anything. And I've never had that in Hollywood before. Always in Hollywood, everything depends. No one wants to hear this, but everything depends on the screenplay. You get a screenplay, the studio says, yes, we'll make this. Here are X trillion dollars for you to play with. The movie then is launched. In this case, there was no time for that. And since this was Levine's own money, it was doubly scary. If the script had stunk, or Attenborough had hated it, or Levine had hated it, he would have been out a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, because we were hiring people and starting to build and trying to get the rights for this bridge and that bridge.
I'm John Burlingame. I write about film music for Daily Variety, and I teach the history of film music at USC. I'm the author of 3 books on the subject, most recent of which is Sound and Vision, 60 Years of Motion Picture Soundtracks. John Addison was a British composer, born in 1920 in Surrey, educated at the Royal College of Music in London, and began scoring films in 1950 for the Bolting Brothers. A thriller they did called 7 Days to Noon was his first film score. Over the course of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, he scored about 70 movies, including some of the best-known British pictures of the 60s and 70s. Films like A Taste of Honey, Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, Tom Jones, for which he won the Academy Award in 1963. He scored Torn Curtain for Alfred Hitchcock in 1966 after Hitchcock's long relationship with Bernard Herrmann came to a very bitter and abrupt end. It was Addison who was brought in to rescore that picture. In addition to Tom Jones, he received 2 other Academy Award nominations. One for Sleuth, marvelous, marvelous job he did on that picture in 1972. Had kind of an almost English music hall quality. And for A Bridge Too Far. And for that score, he actually won the British Academy Award. It's interesting that Richard Attenborough approached Addison to write this score, even though he and Addison had never actually worked professionally together. Interestingly, Addison had written a song for a movie in 1948 that Attenborough was in, a picture called The Guinea Pig. And they had known each other for many years. Addison called Attenborough Dickie, and Attenborough called Addison Jock. They were friendly. They knew each other for many years, as many people in the British industry did. Attenborough called Addison, and I don't know whether Attenborough knew that Addison had actually been a part of Operation Market Garden or not. But it is true that Addison was a tank commander in World War II. He landed at Normandy right after D-Day, and in fact was wounded and managed to save one other member of his tank crew, but lost two others. And then when Operation Market Garden happened in 1944, again, Addison was on the ground as part of the British forces. Addison later said that he did not see much action, but he did remember distinctly what it was like to be in that tank facing the anti-tank guns and on the ground, and they were protecting one flank, as I recall. And Addison later said that he was deeply moved by the film, and it brought back many memories. And he believes that what he wrote was very much rooted in the feelings he had about being there and being a part of Operation Market Garden. Attenborough asked Addison to score the picture, but he did so with a caveat. He really wasn't certain that the film needed music. He liked the sort of semi-documentary approach that he had taken to the material, and he was concerned that the addition of music might make it seem too much like a movie and take the viewer out of the middle of that very intense experience that he was trying to commit to film. Addison understood that, and when he saw the picture, Addison screened the movie in New York with Joe Levine and Attenborough sometime, I believe, in early 1977. Addison walked away feeling not only moved and touched by the experience, but also agreed with Attenborough that there was not much music required. Attenborough asked Addison to take the approach not of scoring the battle sequences, but of looking at the characters and trying to score, as best he could, the people side of the story being told. And Addison took that to heart and went away. There was very little communication between Attenborough and Addison. Attenborough was off in Europe looping actors, while Addison was back in Los Angeles coming up with themes and basically going to work on the score, again in the early months of 1977. So there is really less than half an hour's worth of music in the entire 3-hour film. But what is there does make a specific statement. And I think that Addison recognized Attenborough's parameters here. Don't score the battle sequences. There's no point to it. Concentrate on the characters, on the people. As best you can, enhance that element of the drama.
Peter MacDonald, camera operator, first unit at Bridge Too Far. The job entailed working very closely with Richard Attenborough and Geoffrey Unsworth, who was a cameraman I did about 25 films with. I'd only worked with Dickie before when he was an actor. So it was an incredible experience, really, because I think we spent 26 weeks. It seemed every 2 weeks another superstar arrived on the scene, or we were doing 600 parachutists, or crossing the Rhine in canvas boats, or charging across bridges on tanks. So it was just, I guess it's like a dream to do. You know, it was from a marvelous book, great screenplay by Goldman, beautifully art directed by Terry Marsh and his team. So it was a very classy production with enough time to do it justice. And I guess Joe Levine, who was the producer, was probably the last of those entrepreneur-type producers. I first worked with Geoffrey Unsworth on A Night to Remember, which was a Titanic film made in England, I guess in the 50s. I don't like to think that far back. And I was a clapper boy then, and Geoffrey was obviously a cameraman. And then I went on as his camera assistant on 2 or 3 films. And then when I was in I guess, my maybe slightly late 20s, he asked me to become his camera operator, which at the time was quite unusual because people were normally much more experienced. But Jeffrey knew that I loved film and I used to make my own films. And so he gave me the opportunity, which is fantastic. I mean, overnight your life changes. I'm working with probably one of the best cameramen around, certainly the nicest. And we did maybe 25 or 30 films together. The lucky thing was, I mean, I'd done 2 or 3 films with Sean, worked with Gene Hackman. So the real heavyweight players, I'd work with, Olivia. And you find that, to me, the better the actor is, the less they're worried about, is that my best side, is that my worst side, am I going to get my close up? Because they know they're going to get these things anyway. And then, So it was, no, to me, it's always interesting watching how a different actor approaches a scene, and so it was a joy. I mean, people like Hackman and Connery, Ryan O'Neill, they're all, like all of us, they're all very, very different people, and their approach, Ryan O'Neill was much more cavalier in his approach to acting, whereas Olivia and Hackman are really, they are the person, Sean's the type of person who puts a uniform on, we'd all follow him. I mean, doesn't matter if Sean said over the hill, yeah, okay, Sean, I'll be after you, or before you. So he was great. I mean, so it was, and Bogart was wonderful and had been through Arnhem, which is quite amazing, really, because when you think of Dirk as was a gentleman. I mean, he really was in every respect. Was very sensitive about portraying it properly.
With your 82nd, you get NIMEC.
In order to pull off his scheme and make this movie with his own money, Mr. Levine needed stars. He needed, essentially, for the part of the guy who goes across the river, Julian Cook, he needed a giant star. Today he would have needed Tom Hanks or Tom Cruise. Then he needed Steve McQueen or Robert Redford. And Levine, they did a raid on Hollywood to get stars, and Attenborough knew McQueen. And they had the meal, and McQueen said, good luck, I don't want to do it, I'm not working, I'm very happy, retired, blah, 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 whatever he was. So that means we had to get Redford. And Redford wasn't available, I think, till the end of that week. Somehow, at some point, I'm getting to a point on this, trust me, during that week, McQueen's agents or somebody thought, wait a minute, he was interested. They were after him for another movie, which he'd also turned down, which was Apocalypse Now. I think the Marty Sheen part. And one of his agents, I think, or someone in the McQueen camp figured out if he could get $1 million a week, which is a lot of money today, an amazing amount of money 25 years ago, for 3 weeks from each movie, which was more than anybody had ever made at that point. And they would do the movies so that he could fly from one movie to the other. So he would only work 6 consecutive weeks. He would do it. So suddenly he came back to Levine, and the McQueen forces said, you're not going to get Redford, you better grab him, this is it, this is your shot, blah, blah, blah.
Properly aesthetic, if it works.
When it works.
Of course, when it works.
Thank you.
They're very famous, they're very rich, they're very spoiled. Probably there were reasons for all those things. And they can misbehave, they can stay in their trailer. And we had all these stars that were being jobbed in on a weekly basis. And the summer of '76 was the driest summer of the century, I guess the last century now, in Holland. So we didn't lose a day, I don't think, to weather. Ask Attenborough that. I don't think we lost a day to weather, which is phenomenal. So the schedule held. And the stars were jobbed in and left, and they all were just wonderful. Everybody was professional. It was amazing, because if anybody had been difficult, that means the whole railroad train would have been off, whatever. But they were great. What happened was you had to try and give them each something. They all knew the good thing about the stars in this movie was they all knew there was no pressure on them. There were so many of them. They knew if the movie was a disaster, no one would say, oh, his career is over. And in this case, since there were so many of them, since they only worked a week, 2 weeks, like Redford worked 3, They were terrific. They were just wonderful in terms of the way they behaved.
How about us? We'll be all right. Aside from the fact that we're parachuting in daylight, we have nothing to worry
Jeffrey wasn't a very technical cameraman. He was, he just believed his eye and I guess his heart, so he made it the way he thought it should be, whereas a lot of cameramen you work with are highly technical and spend the whole time looking at meters and discussing the theory. Jeffrey used to photograph to make him feel good. He was like the old-fashioned type of cameraman that was the director's man. Whatever the director wanted, even if it was really difficult, Jeffrey would do, because that's what he was there for, and that's what he felt he was there for. Knew Jeffrey, loved Jeffrey, and totally trusted him. So Jeff would have also spent quite a bit of time, which was always the way, and hopefully still will be for a long time hence, with Terry Marsh, the production designer. So all the great films, especially ones that won awards, have always been a collaboration between the designer and the director of photography. So I guess there's very few countries in the world apart from Holland where we could have, which is obviously where it should have been shot, but we didn't shoot in Arnhem. We shot in Deventer, which is very similar. And the Dutch were just wonderful. I mean, they gave you every cooperation, especially the older people, because they knew how many young men had died to free their country. And the saddest day for me was walking around the cemetery at Arnhem and seeing all these kids, and they're 17, 18, 19-year-olds, that had never touched life, had never had anything that they should have had with their life, had died or been sacrificed.
Movies, roughly, anybody who wants to be a screenwriter, a page a minute. So if you're telling them, so most of my scripts are like 110 pages, something like that, because you'll add stuff, subtract stuff, blah, blah, blah. Attenborough wanted a 3-hour movie. He did not think you could tell the complexity and all the characters in this silly story without having a huge amount of length. And so my first draft, I think, and the finished script were both around 175, 180 pages. Well, that was spooky for me, because usually when I'm on page 100, I'm running for curtain and climax, and here I'm halfway through. And it was a whole different kind of rhythm trying to figure it out. Where do you put these things? Where do you jump to so-and-so? I mean, it gets toward the end when everything screws up. It gets very depressing. Everybody's dying, or everybody's losing. And then I realized what the screenplay was, what the story was that I wanted to tell. It was a cavalry to the rescue Western in which the cavalry gets there late and everybody dies. It was a tricky script to write, and I'm thrilled with the way it worked out. I remember Attenborough cries all the time. And I remember he was reading it in Levine's office, and I went down to meet with him afterwards. And he came out and he was teary. And I'd never had that reaction before, and I think it was simply tears of relief, because that meant he could go forward and make this movie. Because if the script had not been doable, we were just in an unimaginable mess. I mean, we were in a mess of such proportions. I don't know what Levine would have done. It would have meant we missed his date. It would have meant we were delayed a year. It would have meant all the crew he'd hired would have been released, because I don't think he could have kept them on for a year at that salary. Just horrible. So I was thrilled that the movie was accepted. It was a big, tricky, what did it take, 8 days, 10 days, Market Garden, before they retreated? It was a big, bloody battle, and it covered a lot of terrain, and so it was complicated making it work. This was not a case where the Brits woke up and said, I know what let's do. Let's kill all our young men. They thought, my God, let's end the war by Christmas. We can do this wonderful thing. No one was evil. If the plan had worked, it was neat. It was just when you look at it, and I'm going back in memory, it was insane to think it would work. Everything had to go at a certain pitch, at a certain speed, and it couldn't. I mean, when you had, there's a moment I love in the movie, which is me. I was trying to, the Connery forces, they had landing so far away, and I came up with a notion that it wasn't on the map. That was how far we had to walk. I mean, the idea that that was what they're going to be the landing field. Because someone should have said, stop this at so many places, at so many places. Someone has said, wait a minute, let's look at this, guys. Do we really want to have the men walking all these miles and this and that? And nobody did. Nobody did. It's a fascinating battle. Absolutely fascinating.
Just making sure whose side you're on.
To me, one of the most poignant scenes in the film was a boy cycling down the road and the Spitfire comes behind him. Watching this man put the Spitfire below the level of the road, because it was a long road and the kid cycling, there was a little dip the other side of it, and he came up from behind like a helicopter would now. It was just amazing flying, and also all these things happened. They were just saying, yeah, we're here, we're coming, which is, must have given a lot of people a lot of hope and faith that one day they would be saved and safe.
My name is Stuart Craig. When A Bridge Too Far was made, I was a draftsman, assistant art director, and one of a big art department, and our boss, the designer of the film, was Terry Marsh. He was a protege of John Box, who did the David Lean films, did Lawrence of Arabia, did Dr. Zhivago, and then pretty quickly Terry became a production designer in his own right, and indeed still is today. I think immediately before this he had done a movie called Scrooge with Albert Finney, and so Terry, at the time A Bridge Too Far was made, had already just crossed the threshold into sort of big-time production design. And he came from this stable of extremely, prestigious movies, really, David Lean being the best of them. It always had the feeling, lots of Attenborough films have this quality, but you felt that it was special. You felt that it was a crusade of sorts. I mean, it was a film on such a major scale, and the, obviously the cast is sort of stellar in its kind of proportions and so on. But because of that, and I guess because of the success of The Longest Day, it already had a sort of kudos about it, which is, why I guess so many of the real protagonists turned up, why so many of the actors were willing to, join this kind of super film. Quite untypical of British directors. I think Richard Attenborough always had a sense of scale, really, and was never intimidated by size and spectacle. He always had a sense of the operatic, and that was one of his great qualities, I think. And I don't think he had to learn it. I don't think he had to rehearse it. I think he just inherently had it. I think that was, I'm sure he had his private worries and panics, but he was always more than man enough to take on the scale of that, always.
You mean you don't believe
The radios didn't work. I didn't make that up. They would have sued me. That's all true. Everything like that. Everything like that, the Brits knowing the Germans were there and ignoring. There was a bloodlust. There was a big deal. Everybody thought. There were two great generals at this time at the end of the war. The great Brit was Montgomery, and the phenomenal American was Patton. And the Germans were terrified of Patton, and this was essentially about who was going to get to Berlin first. And the Germans knew it was going to be Patton. And they were terrified of what he's going to do to them because he destroyed everything in his path. And Eisenhower, for reasons we'll never understand, gave it to Montgomery. So no Brit was going to stop this. I mean, none of those guys wanted to be the one who said, listen, there are Germans there. It's not safe. We're liable to lose. It was going. The bloodlust was set, man. This was the biggest parachute drop in history, and we all were going to end the war by Christmas, and all that horse shit that generals tell themselves from far behind the line.
Well, if anyone rocks the boat, it's not going to be me.
William Goldman, the writer, was, he's probably the single most famous American movie script writer of all time, but he was there in Holland with the shooting a great deal of the time, and such was his enthusiasm for the project and his commitment to it, and I want to say he was quite he was like a child, really, in the best way, just absolutely overwhelmed and fascinated and loving every second of this, you know, everything that was happening to, you know, manifest his written script, really. I think I'm not overstating it, and only he could say, you know, that it was a first for him, and it was a unique experience. And I think that quality runs throughout the film in a way. I think you know, Attenborough had probably never quite got to that level of of craft well executed and historical research carried through, and numbers of people all sort of committed to delivering. It was impressive by any standards. And then I think, you know, in my lowly position in those days, what was remarkable for me, for years after, you would bump into carpenters, into plasterers, into, you know, construction guys, into people that had been involved with the jeeps and collecting the vehicles and so on, and they would say they remember that one film in there would be the one that they've remarked on and say, wasn't that great? Wasn't that terrific? Do you remember when? And it was remarkable in that sense, the movie. The movie was so ambitious, and it only got made because the Dutch were so in favour, really, so supportive. And the reason they were that, of course, is somebody was actually interested in putting on screen, you know, a hugely important piece of Dutch modern history. And I think it was because they recognised the integrity of the director, the writers, the producers, you know, the whole sort of motive driving the film. They were amazingly cooperative and went to enormous lengths to, you know, to facilitate this film. They really did make a huge effort. It was a British and an American crew employing lots of Dutch people, admittedly, but we were there telling, you know, telling a story, a part of Dutch history.
Gentlemen, this is a story that you will tell your grandchildren.
That's Horrocks. Mightily bored they'll be. That's Horrocks' line. When you come across something like that, you got to use it. Mightily bored. It's wonderful stuff. I mean, that's gold for a screenwriter, when you can find stuff that really happened that you would never think of. But in this case, there was a lot of exposition. There really was. And I mean, the whole speech that the general has when he says, we're the 30th Corps on the way to the rescue, that's explaining a military thing, and that's boring. So I got the notion of having it be you know, the homesteaders and the good guys. Because I thought an audience would grasp that. In those days, back before the beginning of time, Hollywood used to make a lot of Westerns. So all those terminologies were common parlance for everybody that went to a movie in those days. Now you couldn't write that speech because no one would know today. You can't say to an 18-year-old kid who's a movie nut or who goes to the movies and likes all the bloodbath movies that we're seeing now, Cavalry to the Rescue. He won't get, that's a phrase that doesn't make any sense. Now, that's interesting to me. That interests me. That speech doesn't play at all now because the audience would be confused. Those of us who remember Westerns would remember it. But those of us who remember Westerns are not part of the movie audience today. The movie audience is very young. And so all those standards of heroism are gone, all that kind of stuff. So that's interesting. I mean, that whole speech is absolutely archaic today.
The Irish Guards under the command of...
Hi, I'm Roy Button, Second Assistant Director on the main unit, working alongside of David Tomlin, who was the first, and Steve Lanning, who was the co-second. Basically responsible for all the logistics, the organisational points of gathering all the armies together, all the vehicles together, getting people fitted, getting stuntmen, getting planes organised, getting accommodation organised, well, it's pretty quicker to say what we're not really, what we don't have our hands on, you know. It's just organising the day and making sure people turn up on time and they know their words, and the camp is ready in terms of rolling actors in at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning, or getting crowd dressed, ranging from 20 a day to 2,000 a day. Was getting them fitted prior to that. making sure their hair's fine, gathering enough people so that on the big crowd days they're already pre-fitted. So they turn up and they're just pushed through a sausage machine of organisation that we then get ready and then produce the extras on the set along with all the other extras. There were very different types of extras. There were background extras, which were just general crowd, the people who lived in what was meant to be Arnhem, Nijmegen and what have you. Then there was the military. So we had obviously US personnel, we had German personnel, we had British soldiers. So we had all sorts of soldiers to get ready. Interesting point was arming them up, was actually getting someone who's a crowd extra and actually giving them a weapon, which was fireable, because in some cases we had a whole bunch of weapons that were non-fireable. In other words, firing pins out that were just for dress. There's some that were capable of firing, but only firing blanks. Well, there's a very thin line between firing a blank and firing a real round. There had to be strict police checks and the monitoring of the issuing of these arms. So in the morning, it was quite something. There was coachloads of people getting dressed here, guys getting dressed there, lining up at the arms truck. Everything, of course, personally in terms of feeding. Where's the loos? Do we have enough breakfast? What time do we start? It's dark and cold in the morning, you know. Making sure the right guns went to the right people and they'd been trained in those guns to be safe with them and they were responsible for them all day. You know, and if anybody had lost their gun or we saw one that was put down, then we would get the owner of it and obviously ask him not to come again because he wasn't responsible enough to be responsible for his weapon. But a lot of the people were absolutely marvellous. Absolutely marvellous. We used to get them from local. We had a wardrobe base, which was just outside Deventer. Thousands and thousands of costumes. So people get used to wheeling there, get fitted, wheeled out. And one lovely story is when we sent a car up to up to Amsterdam to pick up an actor. I think he was an Austrian or German actor or someone along those lines. And the driver, I can't remember whether he was English or Dutch, went to the airline, held a sign up, didn't know the guy from Adam, came back, drove an hour and a half from Amsterdam and got all the way to the wardrobe base for his pre-fitting. Because what we did, we fitted them, drove them onto the set for Dickie to look at and introduce themselves. So when he saw them, they were in costume, they were ready, he liked them, he would say a lovely. Dickie was always very, very good with the actors. He was charming, as he was with most people, but he particular attention was paid to the actors to make them comfortable. Anyway, so we fitted this guy, got him in the thing. We tried to get him in the car, and he's saying, no, because he could hardly speak English. And I go, well, strange to cast a guy who can hardly speak English, because it's an English-speaking film. Anyway, it turns out that this car had picked up the wrong guy. He was the East German agricultural minister. Now, wouldn't you think he would have said something? Who's got in a car, driven all the way to Nijmegen, got fitted as a Nazi general, got in a car to walk on the set with Dickie Attenborough before he tells us he's the East German agricultural minister. That's absolutely. So we had to put him back in the car and apologise profusely and send him back to Amsterdam.
I'm a doctor.
When you read the script and with what's going on, it's obvious what's needed. You either need a certain type of there's certain type of extras that are what we call passers-by and members of the public. Then you have what we refer to as specialist extras or frontline people. We had a whole, I don't know whether anybody's discussed the APA, which is Attenborough's private army. We had 50 actors, young actors aspiring, stayed in a hostel. They were military trained. They were young, aspiring actors, as I said. So they came over to play a multitask role. So we had them fitted for German, American, all sorts of things. Now, they'd been trained by the army. They were weapons trained and the rest of it. So there was a group of 50 people we could put a close proximity to things who were great. They would work their own bits and pieces out. And they were marvelous. So you had like a frontline group, then you had a mid-ground group, then you had a background group. So depending on what you had to do, you used the specialist talents of all these guys. There's some of the shots in the film that you should watch, because some of the APA, the acting group, who were fabulous, all of them. Some of those have gone on to be quite famous. Ben Cross, loads of the other guys that you'll recognise the faces in there who were in the APA. Well, they're having such a good time. What they used to refer to is they couldn't get too featured, otherwise they'd what we would refer to as a KLM job. Because if they got featured, they get spotted. Therefore, they couldn't be of use anywhere else. So that was, thank you very much, good night, Vienna. There's a KLM ticket back to London. So they all used to try and avoid being recognised. Now, some were unbelievably inventive about how they could walk up the camera, get shot and die without you seeing their face. It was just horrendously funny to see the way they'd either avoid being chosen, because they all wanted to stay. They were all having such a great time. You couldn't get rid of any of them. You know, in the end, when it became increasingly difficult to actually not get shot or killed, you know, the routines they used to pull was horrendous. It was so funny, like getting shot in the head and pulling a hat down over their face, turning around with a hat over their face in the foreground. You know, it was, but I have to say they were all fabulous.
The parachute drop was amazingly tough because we had to make it work for 3 drops. Obviously the English, the American and the Polish. Incredibly expensive. I think we had certainly about 25 cameras, of which 7 or 8 were in the air, you know, stuck on various parts of Dakotas. 2 were with the parachute guys who jumped with them. We had a helicopter and I think a little jet, all with cameras going alongside them, which Robin Brown was the aerial photographer who did an incredible job getting that together. And meanwhile, as they jumped from him, they came down to us and we had another 17 cameras, I think it was. I mean, it's like a nightmare in one way, because you kept on thinking, if it goes wrong, if the wind changes, that, you know, you could have half the people of England there crewing these cameras and about 2 parachutes in shot. And also the young paratroopers had never jumped out of Dakotas before. They jumped out of the back of Hercules. So for them, it's a whole new thing, jumping out of the side of an aircraft, you know, in formation, which is not the way it's done now. But obviously they know that they're brought up on the legend of Arnhem as a victory, you know, which of course it wasn't, but it was a very brave effort by so few guys, led wonderfully there, but not too well back home, where they were given the bad equipment. People hadn't listened to the information that was coming from the resistance about the German Panzer divisions were there. So it was a very English thing, unfortunately, that a lot of really brave young men died because a few arseholes didn't get off their seats and take notice of what they were being told, you know. And the wonderful thing, I think, the wonderful thing for me was as whenever possible, the people that we were portraying, whether it's Frost or Urquhart or Gavin, were there. The real people were there. And that was incredible, because these guys were all in their 60s. I suppose most of them are probably gone now. Some even older, I think, you know. And they were watching it happen, you know. And whenever necessary, they would just step in quietly and say, it was like this rather than like that, you know. It was just wonderful to see these old guys who you realise the bravery of these guys, and without people like that, you know, the whole war could have well have had a different ending.
This theme is the March of the Paratroopers. This is the second primary theme of the score. This is Addison's theme for the 35,000 men who parachuted into Holland. Very stirring anthem, very upbeat and optimistic. Heard both as the airlift begins, for example, and then after the drop, as the soldiers are welcomed by the Dutch people.
There were 2 kinds of glider used in that operation. I think one was called Waco and the other were called Hawser gliders. We decided to opt for the Hawser glider, and we did indeed build replicas of these things. They were pretty good replicas to the point where they actually, you know, at 60, whatever it was, 60, 70 miles an hour down the runway, they actually started to lift because they were aerodynamically perfect. But this thing was completely unairworthy with this one single strut in the wing, the wings beginning to flex, you know, and twist much more than they were ever designed to do. This was the hair-raising, sort of alarming moment. I mean, fortunately, nobody was killed, but they might have been. We were on the edge of going where we should not have gone at that moment. Tony Rimington, actually, who was a colleague of mine, designed them and did the drawings. He was actually putting his money where his mouth was, and he sat in there with a joystick in his hand. He did indeed, yeah. So he was the one who was very nearly left the ground, not to return. I think on the day of the biggest parachute drop, there were 3. As I said, we owned, the movie company bought 3 DC-3s, Dakotas. I think there were 16 in the air that day, so the other 13 were rented. And there were literally 3 armies taking part: the British Army on the Rhine, the Polish Army, I think, and the Dutch Army, of course. You know, all agreed to participate in what for them was a practice, was a military practice, but what for us was the biggest scene in the movie. Was, you know, we were warned that this was such a big operation in military terms, you know, let alone as a scene in a movie. You know, from the general's point of view, it was a big exercise, and the collaboration of 3 different armies, 3 different countries, and it was organised, you know, very, very fastidiously and carefully, and over a long, long period. And we were warned very deliberately and carefully that once this thing was on, you know, once they'd kind of blown the whistle, the green light, given it the green light, there was absolutely no turning back, none whatsoever. But the weather forecast for the day was changeable at best, you know, and we set the thing up. There were 13 cameras around the drop zone, a huge number, and you know, all the camera crews, the director in place, all the walkie-talkie systems, all that kind of stuff worked out. And when the planes took off, and you come to the, you know, the moment beyond which there's no turning back, and the green light was given, and they were on. And then the sun went in, and there was desperation in the camp. I remember Attenborough and Geoffrey Unsworth, who was the cameraman, now dead, absolutely looking at each other in despair and saying, "Turn them back, turn them back, turn them back." And of course, there was no turning back. They knew, we all knew, and they came anyway. I mean, the sequence is pretty good. It would have been, you know, maybe 1 or 2% better in bright sunlight, but pretty impressive nonetheless. Peter MacDonald, who was the camera operator on the film, I'm sure will have very sort of vivid memories of that particular day.
I guess the most coordinated thing was actually the parachute drop, you know, because one had to be convinced on the drop zone when they were going to land, you know, and say these guys weren't used to coming out Dakotas. So we'd have spotters further, you know, a mile or 2 miles away, and because of bad weather, we really got held up that day. It almost looked like we'd have to cancel the day's shooting, which had been horrendous. It was so expensive, I think, 26 or 27 cameras. So we had a series of radios that were telling us what was happening. They were taking off, they're 5 miles away, they're 3 miles away. Then you have spotters saying that they're coming, it looks like they're over the top now. And then I was on a lens, it was 1000mm to 100. We doubled up a 10:1 zoom lens. And literally, I could feel the screen with the back of a Dakota. But what we'd worked out, Robin Brown and myself, is that from the first parachute as you see drop out, you wait 40 seconds before you start tilting down. So the first wave go over, you see parachutists come down, then the next wave come over. And I had my grip, who I'd had with me 25 years, counting seconds, and I'm screaming at him. I said, "No, you must have got it wrong," because I could hear 10, 12, and I'm seeing all these guys go in my foreground. I think this is a disaster because they've all gone. Time I panned down. And eventually he got to about 35 and I lost my nerve and I started tilting down and we started zooming out. And sure enough, our theory, because it was only a theory, was right, that you caught up the ones that were dropped earlier and the ones that were going to drop that hadn't dropped were dropping through your foreground. So the theory was right, but there was a time you think, can I believe it? And I have to say there's 1 or 2 of them that didn't. And we had marvellous shots going down with a single parachutist, which was a bit upsetting when we got 400 up there. Some of the guys, or 2 of them especially, just went down with the first guy they saw, hadn't listened. And so we got a very nice shot, but you could have done it in your back garden. So the coordination there was fantastic. You had these guys in the air, and on the ground we had like another 600 odd parachutists who were already down. So the timing had to be, as you were just about to the ground, the assistant directors on the floor would send the other guys running forward. So as you come down to the ground, you've got all these other guys, if they just landed, rushing towards you. And if you think we had to do that for the English drop and the Polish drop over there, the American drop at the other end, and each one had his own batch of extras, and incredible, really great ADs. We had a real tremendous batch of assistant directors. Because I think certainly at the time, and I think still now, probably English ADs were the best in the world because they really were. They understood filming so well and really were there to assist, and work out and organise. And I say, Dave Tomlin it was just magic to watch these guys, who've been there since 2 o'clock. I mean, some hadn't slept for 24 hours, organising all the troops, being there at 2 o'clock in the morning to get all these parachutes laid out because the plan was the first drop was going to be like 7 o'clock. In actual fact, it happened at 4 or 5 in the afternoon because of the weather, but no one knew that, So it was tremendous logistical nightmare that worked out. And we did it twice. We did it that day, and then about 3 days later, we did it once more because it was a bit late in the day, so we knew we could get the look a bit better. But although it still looked great, because even if it was a bit grainy, it made you believe you were there anyway. And then just in front of our camera, I had 2 cameras right in the centre of the drop zone. I was on one, and a guy called Ken Coles was on the second one. And just in front of us, we heard a terrible scream. And what had happened, one parachute had taken the wind out of the other one, the one underneath it, which very often happens. So the one underneath just goes suddenly from going at a normal landing speed to treble its speed. And this guy hit the deck at about 25, 30 feet in front of us with the most awful scream. You really thought, he's dead, he's good. We got onto the radio and said, we have an injury here. And we had 3 ambulances, and we made sure no one touched him because you knew the worst thing that happened. Anyone had a back injury, the worst thing you can do is touch them. So we just sat with him, talked to him, tried to comfort him, because he was obviously very scared. And I guess that's the first time I realised how small and vulnerable these guys looked. And remember, these guys are not carrying all the equipment that they did then, not as heavy, so. Anyway, the ambulance came, took him away, and we all felt very pressed. And it was about 3 or 4 months later before he made a total recovery. But I guess we were incredibly lucky because it meant between the jumps on the film, we probably had 1,000, 1,500 people jumping on the 2 shots and other sequences we did. So to have one injury that was luckily was bad but not fatal was, I guess, very lucky, and also showed the skill of these guys, who jumped out of a plane they never jumped out of before.
I remember it was a long, long day. It was a long 2 days. So we had it was nearly 1,800 or 2,000 paratroopers on the ground, which didn't drop. Now, they'd been trained. Now, we probably had about 1,500 parachutes. So we trained them to lift, it was windy, to lift the parachute. So there was air in it. So as you pan down from the stick dropping, you already had 2,000 on the ground with their parachutes up, and they were gathering them and running away. And so you had 5 times 50 dropping. Then you came to the shot on the ground, which was absolutely gorgeous. I think we had about 17 cameras or 27 cameras on that whole thing, covering many and varied angles, including 3 cameras dropping. So that was the point of view of the whole thing. And it went really, really well. There was one guy near me who was a paratrooper who fell awkwardly. He was in an immense amount of pain. Obviously, he'd broken his arm, hopefully, and it wasn't his back, but it could have been. He was in that much agony. And I radioed, because there was MOs and ambulances all around the site. And the ambulance trundles over, and the officer comes up. He said, "Quick, he's hurt, he's hurt, he's hurt." This officer looked straight at me. He said, "That's what he's paid for." So, "Don't worry, we're giving him injections." They gave him an injection right through his smock, and he was out like a light, and they carted him off on a stretcher. I thought, well, I can't wait to join the army. All that and food as well. But it was an unbelievable experience. We had a VIP area, which 1 million people came for the day, including the King and Queen of Holland. I think they had trouble getting in because no one recognised them. I think it was, "Well, where do you think you're going?" "Well, who are you?" "Oh, yeah, right." In the end, they got there in the end, which was fine.
Oh, God.
Levine's in the hospital, and I'm going to visit him. And Attenborough calls him from Holland, I think on a Friday. or a Saturday. He's had 3 cloudy days to shoot the drop, and he wants 1 more day. Now, the paratroopers agreed to give him 1 more day. And he called Levine for the right to spend the money, which was, I think, $75,000 for that day, which is Levine's money. And Levine said, why do you need the extra day? Haven't you got? He said, well, I have all the footage I need, but it's gray. It doesn't look like anything. I want to try it again tomorrow. And Levine said, what's the weather prediction for tomorrow? And Attenborough said, gray, more of the same, horrible. And Levine screamed at him, you limey bastard, you no good, whatever it was. But he gave him the day. And that day was beautiful. And everything in that insanely brilliant sequence is from that day, just about everything. Peter McDonald was the camera operator, and he's the one who got most of those shots, I was told. Something else, remember, just as I was under pressure, so was Sir Richard under pressure, because he was traveling all over the world, casting back to Holland, back to here, trying to find German actors, it was a horrible amount of work. It was several years of his life, 24 hours a day. It was just an amazing amount of work. Giant movies are. I think probably they're harder to make then than they were now, because I think the special effects are better now. And you wouldn't have, I don't know what they did, but I remember he was constantly going across, he was jet lagged constantly and flying in, and he was there for a day. Then he'd go up and see so-and-so, and then he'd be back. It was a brutal job. So we worked on the come, is my memory.
My name's John Richardson. I did the special effects on A Bridge Too Far. It involved all of the effects for the film, all the physical effects for the film. Most of it was done for real. It was all the fires, all the smoke, all the explosions, all the tanks firing, all the guns firing, the bullets hitting, the shells hitting, the atmospherics, just, all of the effect stuff that you can think of, really. I'd already worked on Young Winston with Richard, Sir Richard, and thoroughly enjoyed working with him. I mean, he's a great director to work with, very, from my point of view, nice director to work for in as much as he can communicate well with you and, discuss what he wants for the scenes, so that you're given time to, prepare things and get everything ready, which of course on a picture of that type and size, you needed to. I mean, we were making our own mini war, basically. I mean, it was such colossal logistics of getting everything to the right places on the right day at the right time. I mean, when you just considered the amount of hardware and people that we were moving around, and in fact the amount of materials that we went through during the course of the film. I mean, just a few of the figures, for instance, we burnt 10,000 old motor car tires to make black smoke. We blew up in the air probably in excess of 200 tons of powder, cement type powder, for the explosions. That's apart from hundreds and hundreds of bales of cork and peat and stuff to make the explosions look real. We burnt 10 tons of liquid propane gas. We blew up a ton of high explosive and probably went through about 20 tons of low explosives and pyrotechnics. And just the logistics, I say, of getting those in the right place at the right time, let alone the logistics of using them, made it, A Bridge Too Far, a pretty sort of colossal challenge at the time. The 30th Corps breakout was known. We shot in at an army camp in Amersfoort in Holland. It was probably one, and probably still is, one of the biggest single explosion shots that I've ever laid out. I mean, we had, I think 50 odd explosions all wired together over a vast area. We had probably 20 miles of electrical flex laid out to fire all the charges. It took us 3 days to lay all the charges for the one shot, and then it took us about, I think it was 35 seconds to fire it all. The interesting thing about it that I can remember is that we fired it so that it started in the background and the barrage came up towards camera. We had obviously a number of cameras laid out for a shot like that. But you saw this tremendous wall of explosions and debris and dust coming towards you. When it finally reached us, day literally turned to night in 1 second. And we were completely covered in this dust and debris. And it probably took 10 minutes to clear. And in that time, you couldn't see the person standing next to you. It just blotted everything out for 10, 15 minutes or more. Jeff Unsworth adored smoke. He loved smoke in every scene of every movie I worked with him on, and I worked with him on quite a few movies. You know, Jeff and I knew one another very well, and I knew what he liked and how he liked to do things. And we went through hundreds of gallons of fog oil. Particularly on a bridge, because firstly it was a film that called for smoke in the atmosphere anyway, from an explosion or from a burning truck or a burning whatever. So you had to have that smoke, but then Jeff liked a smoky atmosphere, so we were doing smoke on smoke, which is probably one of the reasons we went through so many motorcar tyres, because we had a basic white smoke atmosphere just to give it that general haze. But then any other smoke that we put in that had to be a darker colour to make it show up sufficiently for what what Jeff needed filmically.
Dickie Attenborough was always one of the first I ever worked with who really storyboarded. He had an incredible storyboard artist at the time called Michael White, who afterwards did Gandhi with him and Chorus Line and did several films with Dickie. And Michael also was a real army buff. He knew battles upside down and backwards, so he was a real fantastic person to have around because he knew what happened, and we get a little bit upset if we cheated at all, So he was really good. Dickie certainly loved storyboards, which was great for all of us because it really gives you the feel. And the good thing about those type of storyboards, as opposed to some, they're all possible. A lot of people draw storyboards having never seen the location. Well, not their fault, they haven't been on the location. Whereas Michael was there on location. He knew what we had, what the terrain was, what was possible angle-wise. And very often David Tomlin and myself would spend Sunday morning with him in a kind of free time, just going through the upcoming scenes, whether it was the crossing the Rhine or the parachute drop or the big breakout, and go through and see what Michael had done with Dickie and realise what we could or couldn't do. And if you couldn't do it, you just talk them into maybe making some small changes. But Dickie was a great exponent of storyboards, which I think a film like that is really essential.
It was huge, but there was sufficient time, there was sufficient money, and there was certainly sufficient people. And as I say, the man that was raising the money and overseeing it all was uninhibited enough just to say yes and let everybody run with it. All the problems were because that was the way movies were made then. There was comparatively little visual effects, film trickery. Everything was in camera and real. So movies today are less complicated maybe in their physical production, but they're hugely complicated in their post-production and all the things that they need to take into account. That one was, you know, physical locations, big bangs, lots of hardware. I mean, it was a challenge, but it was a logistical challenge. And the design was about research, really, and was about being ingenious in could you convert a modern Dutch tank to look like a German, you know, Panzer tank. And indeed that's what we did, because for some reason there are none of them, and it's been a problem to war films before and ever since that there are no German tanks existing from Second World War. There are plenty of Sherman tanks, well, not plenty, but there are enough, and movies have been made on that. But they all, and there are no German fighter planes either. There are no Me-109s. You always cheat with something else or make replicas. Or and you know those. Well, I don't think there are any Me-109s in the film, are there? But there are certainly tanks that they're actually modern Dutch tanks with some superstructure put on by us. There was a special researcher. Attenborough employed a researcher for months before people like me actually started, before Terry Marsh's art department started. There was a great deal of research going on. And the great thing about the Second World War is I mean, it's extremely well documented too. So there was never any difficulty of shortage of research. All the information was there. And we had, you probably know, we had technical advisors too. There was a Colonel Waddy, John Waddy, who was a paratrooper, who was the technical advisor who was with us for the longest time, I think, and was certainly there throughout the shooting period, you know, the entire shooting period.
Sir?
Well, that was all part of the planning, and yes, it was a lot to do with us as to where we found the stuff, because we had to go and find APCs and of the right things, and motorbikes and trucks and anything. Well, we were shopping for them from all over England and all over Europe, because they came from everywhere. There was a guy who was in charge of the vehicles called Charlie Mann, who I remember as a place in Cornwall. He seemed to be in charge of most of it, but it was the logistics of finding them. But the worst logistic of all was actually getting them there, was actually placing them on the scene of the crime, as I call it, in the right order at the right time of day. Some of these things moved a little bit. Some of these things moved a lot. And some of these things didn't move. So they arrived on low loaders. So it was like, I might have a column of 30 vehicles. I've also got 17 low loaders. So where do I put them as well as the vehicles? And then do we block the road? And you've only got to do take 2, and then something's overheating because it's that old. So you've got all that whole thing going, you know, getting tank tracks on the road, because having used tanks on real roads before, they tend to suck up the tarmac, especially when you turn them left to right to go back. It just twists the whole tarmac and you suck the road up, and you're left with a very extremely damaged road and a very unhappy council. But a lot of it was very well taken care of. As I say, the logistics of building the houses by the bridge in Daventry, where we built both sides of that bridge, and the underground, the car parks at the bottom where we filmed and did most of the shooting. Some of the shooting out in the countryside, you know, and I have to say, you know, all the actors, you just look at the actors. You couldn't assemble that cast in the movie anymore. You know, I mean, you know, we've got Larry Olivier, Dirk Bogarde, Liv Ullmann. Then I've got Ryan O'Neill, Gene Hackman, Sean Connery, you know, all in the same scene. It's just unbelievable. We used to have a sort of a VIP group of people turn up every now and then who were involved in the real event, and they were extremely pleased and thrilled to see whoever was meant to be playing them, or the story surrounding whoever's meant to be playing them.
Well, I like assault on Arnhem Bridge is certainly a smashing success. I have an aversion to apples, I'm so sorry. I'm sure the Germans will be thoroughly struck with surprise.
Are there many of you?
Yes, there are thousands of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now look here, this isn't a victory parade, you know. Oh, come on, sir, enjoy the moment. I will enjoy the moment when we reach the bridge and when we find the bridge intact. It will be. Things couldn't be going better, nothing's wrong. Yes, I know, that's exactly what is wrong, Harry.
Oh, I'm so...
Yes.
It was the bridge that never was. I mean, the bridge didn't actually exist, and we couldn't afford to build one. So we built the beginnings of the bridge, or just the start of the bridge going up away from camera, which I think, if my memory serves me correctly, was built in perspective anyway, so it was fairly short lump. Then to show the bridge being blown up, I mean, it was shot and seen from Elliot Gould's perspective. So we had high explosive charges in the water, which created the big columns of water that came up, and we had some separate explosive charges down there that was blowing boards and debris and bridge-looking material up in the air. So we, sort of fired the whole lot in a sequence that looked as though it was the bridge pylons being blown up from underwater, and then the bridge going up after it, and that's basically how it was done. I can remember they were incredibly worried about the fish in the lake. It had been a very hot summer, and the fish were not in particularly good health anyway, so we put a series of small charges in the water that radiated out, so that we could fire those charges a few minutes before we fired the big charge. The idea being that we frightened all the fish away from the area before we let the big one off, so we didn't end up killing a lot of fish.
John Richardson, the special effects chief, I must say, was absolutely amazing in that he'd said to Elliot Gould and the rest of the crew, you must run, but you must come no further than this line here, because beyond that point it's dangerous, you're going to get hit with something, And he was absolutely as good as his word. I mean, the final piece of debris landed a yard in front of Elliot Gould's feet.
Oh, that's terrific, except 30th Corps ain't about to reach the goddamn intact Grave Bridge until the
We worked with all the actors on the movie in a sort of very close, explosive environment. Anthony was certainly very closely involved around the house with all the fires and explosions that were going on. The one thing I've always found with all actors is, if you take the time and trouble to go over to them and explain what's going to happen, and tell them, exactly where the dirt and debris is going to go, how hot it's going to be, how loud it's going to be, what to expect, what not to do, what to do, and as long as you're thoroughly professional about it, they normally appreciate that. And certainly on bridge, I can't remember any problems, certainly that I faced with any of the actors. They all, stuck it out, and they were there with the rest of us, and I don't recall one complaint.
This is a film. It's a very good film, but it is only a film. It's all about safety. It's all about getting the visual image you want, but safely. As to where the cameras go, and where the special effects go, and where the cars go, whether that tank's going to go this way, and is the ground safe, and which way will this explosion go, so those guys don't go anywhere near that. It's all about getting the shot you want, but getting it safely.
Let's hope Johnny's meeting.
We had Sean Connery next to a Jeep that blew up and flipped over, and in fact, when that happened, he was very close to it, and we built a Jeep with a cannon in the back of it. In the cannon, we put a very small black powder charge. I mean, it was literally sort of 3 ounces of black powder. I mean, as much as you get in a household firework. So it was a very controlled situation. And the cannon had a sort of steel piston in it, and you put the black powder charge inside, and put a telegraph pole coming down from the piston onto the ground, onto a steel plate, and then we put an effects explosion underneath the Jeep and fired the two together, and the explosion went off, and the telegraph pole went down, and the Jeep went up, and it flipped over. And I say Sean was probably no more than 30 or 40 feet away from it when it went bang, and he was absolutely fine.
the biggest thing of all, and I guess the first decision, or the first massive problem that was solved, is how do you replicate Arnhem Bridge, because it's so busy. You know, the town of Arnhem is extremely busy. The bridge of Arnhem is obviously one of the main arteries across the Rhine there, and absolutely impossible that a movie company could move in and just take it over for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. So one of Terry Marsh's early scouts was to find a bridge, a substitute bridge, and they discovered in the small town, much smaller than Arnhem, the town of Deventer in Holland, they found a bridge which was indeed very, very similar. I mean, it had that huge steel span, you know, that big curved arch, double arch, and they talked to the city authorities and, you know, tentatively put their proposal, you know, is there any way we could please shut down this kind of major highway, for months and months and months on end, literally. The other fortunate thing about this particular location, this particular bridge in Deventer, was that there was a huge car park under the approach, the run up to the bridge on one end, and a car park represented, you know, potentially open land on which we could build a set, because the story of Colonel Frost at the Arnhem Bridge was that he occupied the houses immediately surrounding the approach to the bridge, and that's where the British were kind of holed up and defended the bridge for so long, you know, against the advancing German. So this car park was the fact that the bridges were similar in appearance, but also that this car park, those two big factors were the kind of gateway to the film, or making the film possible. So that was the biggest challenge and the first one to be solved.
The sequence around the Arnhem Bridge with Colonel Frost in the houses was basically, it was a set that we constructed. The set was designed by Terence Marsh, and all the houses were built by Peter Duclos, the construction manager. Obviously, we had to liaise very closely between Terry and Peter Duclos over the construction, because there was so much destruction had to be done to the houses. We had to blow great lumps and chunks out of them during and throughout the entire sequence. And, you know, not only that, but we had to blow them up with the cast and crew actually inside them. In the windows, firing out of the windows, standing on the roofs. So we had to be, you know, pretty fail-safe in what we were doing, and sure that, you know, when we were blowing something up, it was our debris that was going, and not something, you know, hard or sharp that could hurt anybody. I mean, there were a vast amount of bullet hits all throughout the movie. We did a lot of it using conventional squibs and cork. I mean, the biggest problem in a road situation, especially when it's a real road, is there's nowhere to hide the wires. So we had to be a little creative when we did that, and, you know, hide wires in the gutter and in bits of debris that were already in the road. I think from memory we pre-rigged the walls of the pillbox, and then we did a lot with capsule guns, which in those days were firing the sort of conventional gelatine capsules full of dust, so that we could, you know, spread those around quickly and easily, and reload time was minimal for that.
Are you all right?
Yes, I'm fine.
We'll deal with them later. It gets dark.
We actually found from Baptist the gunsmiths, who we were using, a flamethrower that was correct for the period. It was getting rather old by that time, so we stripped it down and rebuilt it in a sort of safer way. I can remember doing lots of testing with it and setting fire to the field at the back of our workshop with great glee, because we could actually get the flames from this thing to go for about 75 feet or more. Then when we got to the filming, it was obviously night work. We trained the actor up how to use the flamethrower. And then for the big explosion when it hit the pillbox, or the ammo dump at the back of the pillbox, we laid in, I believe it was 55 different charges, which were on a long wiper board. And we had charges to blow up the hut, charges to send debris in the air, charges to send white ammo stars, which were supposed to represent the ammunition in the pillbox, fireballs, flares, you name it, we had it in there. And that again was quite a fun, from a special effects point of view, fun thing to do, or shot to do, because there was so much going off in such a short space of time, and they're always a good ones. Looking at a steel bridge burn is going to look a bit odd unless it's done correctly. It did in fact happen, and the paint on the bridge started burning, but it was predominantly propane gas, and it was all piped up through special burners and special pipe and hosing. And I think we ran it through a sort of fireproof fabric tube so that it dispersed the gas out.
You know, when we did the burn in the bridge, that was all piped gas. You know, we had the whole bridge. I mean, it's an unbelievable thing. You know, they just piped in the gas so you could light the gas so the bridge looked like it was flaming. Obviously, then you could have certain fires around, and once again, the famous burning tires. But I remember when we first arrived and we were doing what's called Grabner's Charge, which is the first scenes that Jolivine was going to take with him to America to try and get the money. So this was like any stars at all. And we just playing around. And I looked through a 1000mm lens at this bridge, and I just saw an aerial come over the bridge. And I said to Richard Attenborough, look at that. Because no video those days. So you, as a camera operator, anyone who saw the shot, there was no video. You saw it. You had to be trusted. And no one else saw it for another 2 or 3 days sometimes. So we got the rushes back. So Dickie saw this, and just an aerial comes out, and then behind the aerial comes the armoured car, I think it was, you know. And it just looked so amazing because we're on these 1000mm and 800mm lenses quite often. And we used to intercut that with really wide angle. We used to go to, we had a lot of kind of IMO cameras, which were the wartime cameras. I had those made up so you could put anamorphics on them. I know they were like disposable cameras, so you could put those right under a tank with a wide angle. And if it got whacked, it got whacked. It was no big deal, you know. So you had a mixture of kind of in-your-face photography, as it were, you know, with everything overpowering you, or long lens, which really itemizes the piece that you're scared of, which is very much what we do. I mean, you go out in the countryside and you see a wonderful view, and you take in the whole view, and you drink in the sun, the willow trees, the cornfields, all that type of stuff. You're scared, and you see that animal running at you, or whatever it is. I mean, you just zoop. So that's what this lens did, which, you know, I guess in a way was something that, you know, I got Dickie into, and I think it worked superbly well, you know, because you could isolate, very much like, you know, as I said earlier, black and white does. You could isolate really the point of interest, you know, and then I say then the dynamics of something running over the top of camera was even more scary.
We had, for the tanks advancing over the bridge, a number of lightweight Kubelwagens, I think they were, that we were able to dress out in the road. So we dressed those out there with fires in and smoke, and the tanks were then able to come over, and they could either just bat them out of the way or drive straight over them, which they did. I mean, they'd crush them down to a sardine can size.
We had a really good team, and no one was kind of ego was going to try and think, I'm the only important person. It wasn't about the sets, it wasn't about the photography, it wasn't about the explosions. It was about all the things put together to get the best results, which I think the film succeeds in doing. So it was great in that respect. And Dickie's a great leveler. Dickie is. I mean, sometimes you look at it and think, are you really directing this huge film? Because he's such a nice, easygoing character. A very caring, very generous man. And, not one of these Americans I've worked with, who would be shouting and screaming and almost you think you're with MacArthur or something, But Dickie is kind of quietly leads and allows people a lot of their own imagination, a lot of their, to do their own work, and will step in if necessary, So, and people got on very well because they all knew each other, Certainly Terry Marsh, the designer, and Geoffrey Unsworth have worked together a lot. Johnny Richardson was probably the best. He took over his father's mantle, who had been special effects chief, and Johnny took over that and did an incredibly big job. And the thing about explosion, there's not much difference between explosion in the film and explosion in reality. To move all that shit up in the air, you need something really big to make it go. You don't have the shrapnel that comes out of stuff, although sometimes it does. I mean, you could never tell if it's going to grab hold of one piece of metal and send it through someone. It's always, at the end of every shot, you always have a little check to make sure everyone's okay. And often the danger is the fact that as people get more relaxed, you do it again and again, people become a little casual about the reality of how dangerous it is. So it was very important. That's why it's great having an AD like David Tomlin, who will pull someone right back into line if he saw they were endangering themselves. Because that's what people normally did. It wasn't endangering other people. It was, oh, it's safe here, I can stand there. And you say, no, but if the tank just misses that, you're dead, simple as that. The guys inside can't see through the smoke. And also people get the moment, they get hyped up with the moment, So I think we got through, there was a couple of accidents off the set, but I think on the set, I think one stunt guy had a broken collarbone, but otherwise, I think, 26 weeks of non-stop action, we got away with hardly any injuries. I mean, you can get the same in just a normal film, I guess at the time, it was the crew was about as good as you could get at the time. I mean, with Terry Marsh and Jeff, David Tomlin, Johnny Richardson. I mean, it was a really, top-notch crew who knew what they were doing and could be trusted.
Old men, children.
I'll have to risk it. It's halfway through the morning and things aren't getting...
The shot where General Urquhart's in the house and the German soldier comes up outside the window and he shoots him between the eyes through the window. It again was a fairly tricky one because you needed to see the glass break, you needed to see the window break, you needed to see a blood hit on the man's forehead right between the eyes. We used a couple of different things. We positioned a piece of perspex or plexiglass outside the window at a 45-degree angle, so that you had the real glass was in that position and the plexiglass was there. The soldier outside was standing behind both pieces of glass, so he was protected from the real glass by the plexiglass, so that we could fire a ball bearing, in fact, through the real glass, creating the bullet holes and sending the glass shards out towards the soldier, which was correct. But he was played by a stuntman, as I remember, and he was, completely protected from that. Now, we then had to get an angle on the outside so that we could fire a blood hit from a compressed air gun onto the middle of his forehead. So he's looking through the window and the ball bearing goes through that way and the blood hit comes through that way, and timing it, I seem to remember, was the trickiest thing, but even at slow motion on video it seems to hold up okay.
The reason that Deventer was chosen to double for Arnhem was the fact that it hadn't been hit as hard by the war, so a lot of the buildings you could still photograph. The art department made the buildings we destroyed, but a lot of the other buildings and the surrounds you could photograph, you know. When we worked at Nijmegen, that was a little bit more difficult, but we were basically then, when Nijmegen Bridge was taken, you know, you had the huge river, so, and once again, with long lenses, you could keep any of the stuff you shouldn't see out, you know, and so, and it had been well thought out. I mean, you know, Terry and Jeff and Dickie had done a lot of location hunting and realised the problems and wanted, you know, it to be authentic, which, you know, I think it was.
They're certainly at the back. What's it like at the front?
It was scary because it was so big at the time that you look back on it now and you think, wow. You know. I mean, as I say, having done Gandhi and all the rest of them, but it's that was quite special because it was quite difficult. So you were in the confines of a town trying to get it right. And then you've got all the other things going on other than the movie. You've got all the transportation, where do you live, or where do you park the cars, does, you know, the locals, making sure they're okay, and the local councils, just making sure everybody's you know, on board, because you're there for quite a time. You can't just go in and leave.
Explain to me, please, why my men and equipment cannot be moved from here to there.
It's a massive undertaking. God, it's hard. I mean, it was so, I don't remember how big the crew was. It was gigantic, and I remember he insisted on the food being English because it can get very depressing. You're away from home, you're in a foreign country, you've got money to spend from per diem, but you're still away from your family, and it can get very gloomy. So it was a long shoot, but they were very lucky. I think everybody who was on it was happy they did it.
Well, what I'm trying to say, General, is, I mean, even if we move your troops the 50 miles, where I grant you just now the sun is shining, the chances are that by the time we get there, the fog could quite easily have preceded us.
There's a big scene with Elliot and Michael Caine in Eindhoven when Liberation was there and they were rolling through. Actually, I made it much more difficult for myself because Dickie's idea was to do one beautiful crane shot. And it was a nice shot. And I argued a bit with him, saying, well, that's a nice shot, but there's no immediacy there. You're not in amongst it. You know, you have all these thousands of people and you want to, you know. So we went from that to lots of long lenses. Really, I think we did it in 1 or 2 goes, but had a multi-camera setup instead of one beautiful crane shot. We had a multi-camera setup with long lenses to pick out the main actors. And I went into the crowd with a handheld camera and did a lot of stuff, you know, of crowd and also behind crowd as if you were actually there at the time, you know. So once again, it's what I was saying earlier, it was a mixture of bringing out, isolating someone on a long lens and then getting the immediacy of a wide angle in amongst the crowd that makes you feel you are there, you know. So that was a case in point, and that was that also is what's wonderful about someone like Attenborough. You know, he trusted us, and so if you say to someone like Dickie, that's a good idea, but what if we did this? And it's totally different. If Dickie thought it was better, he would do it. Whereas many people's ego wouldn't even allow them to even go there. I mean, and lots of them wouldn't even think about, well, I won't even discuss this because they don't want to do it different. They want to do right or wrong the way they see it, which is fair enough. It's a director's film. But Dickie, you know, was kind of big enough to say, that's a better idea, we'll go for that, you know. And suddenly we had to wake up about, remember we shot it on the Sunday, so suddenly we had about 5 irate camera crews because we had to phone them up Sunday morning at about 8 o'clock. Most of them weren't feeling too good after Saturday night out, and get them into work as opposed to this one beautiful crane shot. We got everyone out of bed and did it this way, which I'm glad we did. I think it has a great feel to it, and you really do feel what it was like to be free.
They could be right.
The sequence with Jimmy Kahn in the Jeep was in fact one of the first sequences we shot on the movie. I think in fact it was probably the first sequence we shot. The overriding memory was going through an awful lot of fog oil because Jeff wanted to fill the trees with smoke. Literally hundreds of gallons of it. We had bullet hits left, right and centre. You know, lots of smoke, fires, atmospherics, the usual. things that, you know, they became an everyday part of our lives out there, burning tyres, and we used to spend hours in the shower at night when we got home washing off the black.
Jeffrey loved using smoke. I mean, in some films to diffuse, but in like the war films, we literally, with the help of Johnny Richardson, who was the special effect supervisor, which once again would be totally illegal now. I mean, there were tyres being burnt all over Holland. I mean, it's a wonder Holland isn't a totally black country now, but that was the only way, in fact, the only way you still can do it, but now you're not allowed to, probably wisely. But so Jeffrey would love to use smoke, like most good cameramen would love things to be either backlit or three-quarter backlit, so you get that much more magic look. So you knew you had a scene that was very, very strong, and so you had to do it justice. And I did a lot of it. I was a bit younger at the time, tied onto the bonnet of, or the hood as they call him, of James Caan's Jeep, while he drove through these woods. We also had a little Cheval, a little Citroen car made up that you could just go through shit in, chasing it, so you could actually go through whatever bumps. Because once again, this is before Steadicam, so you had to improvise more. And funny enough, I was never ever scared when James Caan was driving, although he was a wild man. It's only when I had the stunt guys driving that I got quite a few bruises and got thrown off the Jeep a couple of times. Because that Caan really was, I mean, and he was driving one arm round the guy and one arm here, and going through woods, you'd rehearse roughly where, but you've only got to miss one tree this way, and it was going into somewhat the unknown, and you had to have the feeling of speed, you couldn't be leisurely. So we did a lot of fast tracking, long lens, through the trees on him, and once again, as I said before, then on board with him, handheld, so, and I say it was a bruising experience, but a good one. Once you get on telephoto lenses, it's very much like we've all done, look through binoculars, and you look through binoculars, it's so hard to actually hold on to what you want to hold on to. So when you're operating with a 800mm, 1000mm, you've got to be very brave. You've got to go with it, and you kind of obey an instinct. It's kind of, and I was very lucky because it came almost to me quite natural, because I was never nervous when I was operating. All my life I'm nervous for other things, but operating, I loved it so much that I was never ever really nervous. I knew it could be done, and used to do it. So, and it was always so exciting because everyone's seeing a scene real. It's a little tiny thing in the distance of a Jeep going through. You put 1000mm on, you've got this guy going through the woods, head and shoulders, with all the trees going through in foreground, explosion in the background. I thought it's just tremendous. I just love that, the feel it gives, the feel of speed, and the feeling of isolating what you're interested in.
Where the young captain gets, I think we found a hillside in some forestry commission land, as I remember. So there were trees. It was a woodland landscape which was already destroyed, decimated, because they'd gone in there and kind of clear cut this thing. And we were able to, again, to dig shell holes and put in shattered, take tree stumps and wrap them with explosive and make shattered ends and so on. So we were able to make that set very convincing, I think, very quickly. And then the field hospital was a series of tents and duck boards, and it was the good thing about it is you just didn't do the bare necessity. You didn't cut inside to the kind of operating section and just get immediately. You actually see the Jeep arrived. You see the wounded captain taken out, and the scene setting, the establishing shot, is kind of glorious, isn't it? It is. It's rich. It's complicated. It's detailed. It's authentic. It's muddy. It's urgent. It's good stuff. It is.
What shocked me here was when the movie came to America, the critics did not believe us, because the spectacularity of our action was something that seemed such Hollywood horseshit, they didn't believe it. Example, the great Jimmy Caan sequence, which is where a soldier's captain is killed He drives through enemy lines with the corpse, goes to a medical station and says, puts him on the table and says, save him, and the doctor says he's dead. And he pulls a gun on the doctor and says, save him or I'll kill you where you stand. And the doctor says, holy shit, he's alive, and he saved him. And he lit the carrot. Well, that's a phenomenal piece of action. You can't make up stuff like that. It's so great. Well, they didn't believe it. And it was like, when the movie came to America, we were very well received around the rest of the world. In America, less than we had hoped, because they just didn't buy a lot of our spectacularity. And we were dead accurate. But you're in the hands of the gods as to what the critics will decide is accurate and isn't accurate. And the other thing is, this was really pretty much the end for me, I think, of doing movies where the people were alive. It's too dangerous because you can't be accurate. And you're liable to hurt people, and it just gets icky. But in this case, Attenborough, England is a little pimple of a country. At one time, the sun never set there, but it does now. And they take their battles very seriously, and they love disasters. So the most famous World War II battle was Dunkirk, which was a gigantic disaster for them. And Arnhem was the second largest. And Attenborough is a big figure over there. He's a huge charity person. He has a whole life besides his acting and his directing. And it's a small country. And he kept saying, we must be dry dust military. We must be accurate on this. We couldn't really make up much at all because he couldn't face that because he has to live in England. Attenborough was very anti-war. And his career was not blooming at that moment as a film director, I don't think. I don't think everybody's saying, oh my God, let's see if we can get Richard Attenborough on the phone. To be offered this huge project about something really close to his liberal heart was a wonderful thing for him. He was working, but he wasn't, I don't know. He did some brilliant work. What was fascinating with that whole process, which I've never seen because most movies are very secretive, was on Bridge, since we jobbed in the actors, we had, for example, the entire, let's say, Jimmy Caan sequence. And what Levine had done was he had it edited in the editing room, on the soundstage, whatever. And he invited anybody who owned movie theaters from around the world to come see. So they'd see this stuff. They'd see the, whatever it was, they'd see completed businesses. And they could tell, like the Jimmy Caan sequence, a terrific sequence, I think. And they could see that, and so they saw the quality of it, which is why the bids went so high. That part of it for Mr. Levine was the great joy of it. He loved, I heard him on the phone insult studio heads because they needed to be nice to him because he owned something they wanted, because the various studios were bidding for it, et cetera, et cetera. And that was again gutty, because he could have gotten out from under if he'd grabbed earlier bids, but he didn't. It was in profit $4 million the day it opened, which is, that means profit. That's a lot of money. That means it would be in profit the day, what, $12 million? It was a huge success commercially. Levine made lots of money back. It was an amazing gamble. He just did it.
Elliot Gould was it was like relief and a revelation. It comes off that way. And the scenes with him, because you knew as a guy that was going to make it work, as an actor, but also he was portraying a guy that was very much like that, but it was going to make it work, but in a different way to what you expect, So it was really just fun. I think we were working night work as well, which is always a bit of a pain, but I always remember him chomping his cigar and just being, he was great. He was light relief. And I think any film that is that heavy, needs a light relief, because you find most time people are scared. They try, whether they want to or not, they normally trying to put humor into a situation, and he was just, it was a bit of light relief. It was still a very important scene. So watching Elliot and his men build the bridge at night, was really fantastic. And I think we almost did it as well. We had the experts with us, so we had to do some sort of continuity to build up what we were doing. But Elliot is, and still is, I'm sure, quite a character. I think night work is always, I know limited times I've photographed myself, you know, the one thing you dread is seeing exterior night rain or something. You think, oh God. So normally, I mean, I know the way, you know, some of the stuff we did with Jeffrey, like, you know, Hackman crossing the river at night and Elliot building the Bailey Bridge at night. Jeff would have like 4 or 5 really tall cranes, 100, 120-foot cranes. Each one would have a nose stage with arc light, which is a beautiful light, very soft light that will give you backlight as if it was the moon. Then that would be enhanced. I mean, when we did the Gene Hackman, if I remember, that was enhanced by the fact that they got discovered. So there were the flares were going off, so you could really burn out the negative, you know, from being almost night and you can't be seen to worse than broad daylight, you know. So that the difficulty for any cameraman is to make night, but as an audience, you still have to be seen it. I think we've all been to the cinema, especially in recent years, when you've seen cameramen's work when night is night and you know something's on the screen, but you're not too sure what it is, you know. That might be authentic, but you might as well listen to the radio, you know. So I think Jeff and that type of cameraman of his era really got night work to perfection, you know. So you could see enough, just enough, but you could believe it's night. You could believe you could bump into a tree, into a German, you know, because it was mostly backlit, so everything was silhouette and shadows. And once again, then the use of smoke is always very useful because you can light huge areas by having smoke in the atmosphere, and if you backlight smoke, it will just give you acres of light, as opposed to if you have nothing in the atmosphere at all, you poke a light into that and you see nothing. So you always hope in the wind's going in the right direction, because the thing about smoke, it does what it wants to, not what you want it to. So I think Jeff's approach was very much the way that films were photographed then, which is a lot of very high towers with a kind of soft, slightly blue light, and enhance it with whatever was necessary, whether it's explosions, flares, smoke, and that was about it.
No, that was a real Bailey Bridge supplied by an army unit, and I can't remember which. Maybe it was the British Army on the Rhine who came, and again they came on the understanding that it was to be a military exercise, and that you know, their new recruits would come and they'd have a chance to build a Bailey Bridge in a real situation, and so they scheduled it, they programmed it, they came, and we were there to, you know, again, there was no, once they'd started, there was no going back. You couldn't wait till they got halfway through and say, can we go back to the beginning? They built it as they built it, and we filmed it. But as always in movies, they got to the, you know, late in the afternoon on the last day and said, sorry guys, we're going. And the movie company said, but yeah, we're not finished, you know. But you know, they had a different agenda, and of course they needed to go, and they went.
This is the main theme of the film. This is Addison's 30 Corps March. It's music we hear over the main and end titles. It symbolizes the spirit of the land forces. Spirited, lively march, played at various tempos throughout the picture, sometimes slow, sometimes stately, sometimes very obviously martial. Heard at moments of triumph, such as the completion of the Bailey Bridge.
Terry built the houses. We then designed the destruction that we were going to do for any given explosion, and this meant cutting out the wall to the after destruction phase of it, rebuilding it with broken brickwork, and then we would build up with a dummy lightweight brickwork, probably using either cork or plaster and vermiculite, to give a sort of real brick finish, and also real bricks flying through the air from the explosion. And then inside that, I would go in, do a little bit of cutting out, put in some Cortex or primer cord to actually break the bricks up. And then inside the house pointing out, we'd put some pretty heavy steel mortar pots that were sandbagged in. We'd lay into those fairly heavy tamp black powder charges. We'd cover it up with varying amounts of cork, felt, and dust and debris, and blow the charges in a sort of set sequence, which would break them up and project the debris out to, you know, give the effect of a tank shell or whatever it was supposed to be hitting. That all worked remarkably well. And we got right through the sequence. We did all the destruction, no problems at all. At the tail end of it, I forget the scene we were actually doing, but it was one of the sort of real sort of minimal effects scenes. And we'd had some tires burning around in the street, just creating a little bit of flame and black smoke. Somebody had pushed, we used to burn the tires in cut-off oil drums for safety. It kept the burn a bit cleaner and saved damaging the cobblestones. Somebody, and we never did find out who, had moved one and pushed it, I think out of the road to get past or something, but they pushed it up against the wall of one of the houses. The wall being a cavity wooden wall, had got very hot through the plasterwork, and it started to smoulder inside, but it started inside the cavity, and obviously we couldn't see it. And the heat built up, and suddenly there was a very loud whooshing noise, and this flame and heat that had built up in the cavity just flashed literally from the ground floor right up to the top of the house. There was nobody physically in the house at the time, but we had some equipment in there. I immediately ran in and ran up to the top. I think it was 3 or 4 stories. And in those days I could run up 3 or 4 stories. And we got the bulk of the equipment out. I can remember getting some fairly painful burns on hands and face and things, but we got it all out. We lost the house, but fortunately it was, I say, at a point that was the real tail end of the scene, and it just became one of our background destroyed houses. And it was only the one house, you know, everything else around it was saved, but it was a scary moment, and it did, you know, demonstrate what all the concerns have been about, and, you know, I think showed everybody that we weren't being overcautious in the first place.
The first anybody knew of an emergency was that there was smoke and flame, indeed, out of the top of the building. And the fire brigade was called, but essentially it was a plywood and plaster set, you know, and there was no, once it was on fire, there was no holding it. So that dramatically accelerated the destruction of the set, and was something which was, for the next several days, was quite difficult to live with, the kind of legacy of this prematurely destroyed building. We actually utilised bits of it and rebuilt, as far as we were able, rebuilt bits of it. They were sets that were complete inside and out. And the movie needed that freedom, really, to move from inside to out. And also, it was a set which evolved. It wasn't built and finished. The sets appeared complete and intact, obviously, at the beginning of the movie, and then were progressively destroyed. So they had to be built, again, rather unusually, with that facility that you could actually progressively take the roofs off, shatter the walls, profile broken brick walls, smash the window, smash the glass. And you had to shoot everything fairly strictly, not that movies ever quite manage this, but in strict continuity, really, because they were, you know, once you started to destroy, and they were some very substantial houses. They were 4- and 5-story big houses. You know, there was no going back once you started to take the roofs off and so on.
So there was one container of berets that one of the actors had to run over and pick up, and we built a parachute rig so that you could actually, with a crane, you could take a parachute and whatever it was you wanted to drop up to 100 feet and release it, and it would fall and float down. It would just hold the canopy in a permanently open position so that when you released it, it had to come down open. The whole movie was a wonderful experience. I mean, I did The Omen immediately before Bridge, and I did Superman almost immediately afterwards. So they were three very varying movies in a very short few years. And Bridge had such a great crew. I mean, it had a great cast, but the crew that Richard put together for it was, a team of real professionals. And Jeff Unsworth, who was, a wonderful craftsman. Terry Marsh and his entire art department. The production department, John Palmer, Eric Rattray, I mean, they were all real professionals. Terry Clegg. It was a pleasure to work with all of them. And I hope the results show up on the screen. I mean, I think the one thing that one can say about Bridge is it's a very professional, polished movie. And even 25 years, 26 years later, it still comes over like that. And I think that's hats off to all concerned.
Taxi!
I remember once getting a phone call from somebody saying, "What do you think about these movies now where they'll cast for international rather than for Hollywood?" And I said, "You mean like Francis Ford Coppola is doing?" And they said, "No, we mean like Joseph Levine is doing." And I said, "It's the same deal." But Coppola was then golden, and Levine was this fast-talking cigar smoker from Boston. He did not smoke cigars, never did. He smoked very slowly, but that was the image of him. He was a very brilliant, cranky man. The thing was, he did all this himself.
Bridge Too Far was the first picture I ever worked on with Joe, and he was great. I mean, he was the last of the big showmen. He was a showman. He was a producer. He had that sort of style, and I don't think there were too many people then or now that could have raised the money for that movie. I mean, it was a big budget, and it was a big movie to take on at that time. And I would seriously doubt if it could be done today. But somehow Joe got it together and did it, and he used to come down to the set very frequently. He was a character, but he was a lot of fun.
Joe turned up. Yeah, Joe was there quite a bit. Well, at the beginning, he was a charming man. He was fine. We had his son, Richard, on the set for most of the time. He was a stills guy. Joe was absolutely in awe of what was going on. He couldn't believe how many people it needed and how often you had to feed them. But do you know what? If I didn't know much and I turned up and it looks as though I'm paying for everybody in sight and feeding them from here to there, you'd ask the questions as well. Of course you would. But he was charming. Absolutely charming. You call anybody who was in charge, whether it be the producer or the director, the governor. But he certainly was that, because on the grounds it was all his money and part of Dickie's visions. But he was really nice. I remember him. Very, very, very outspoken. Very, but said what he meant. No, he's great. Listen, anybody who gets involved in something like that and took it the way he did, good luck. He's a good guy.
It's the big story for me, because I was flying back from Holland to New York, and I got a message from General Frost. Would I meet with General Frost in London? And so I changed and I went to London and we had dinner. And I never, I revered him. And we were having dinner. We got through the initial minutes. He said, "You've got to change that scene." And I saw this look of fear, this horrible look on his face. And I said, "What scene?" He said, "That scene where the Germans, and you have me saying, I'm sorry we can't take you all prisoner. We don't have enough troops to take you all prisoner. And he said, people will think I'm making too much of myself because I did not say that line. It's a great line, and it was said. And I remember saying to him, would you mind being present when it was spoken? And he said, no, that would be okay. And that was the moment when, after that dinner, I thought, I can never do this. I got to be very careful.
Tell him to go to hell.
We haven't the proper facilities to take you all prisoner. Sorry. What? We'd like to, but we can't accept your surrender. Was there anything else?
All right?
And I thought, we must be very careful of what myths we send out because we don't know what they're going to do. And in the case of the Frost moment, I was just making a moment. I was trying to build up the star, which is what you do. It's pointless to give a terrific moment to a secondary character. And I had no idea that it would upset the general. No idea at all. And he was so upset, and I thought, oh my God, I remember him saying, my friends will think I'm trying to make more of myself, because they know. Because I guess in England, that's a famous moment. It's a tough thing. I just think I'll never get involved again with the people that are alive. Ever, ever, ever.
This is Addison's Dutch Rhapsody, the third primary theme in the picture. This symbolizes what Attenborough later called the tragic stoicism of the Dutch people. It's one of Addison's most heartbreaking melodies, often voiced by woodwinds and strings, heard to best advantage late in the picture for scenes of the devastated Arnhem and for shots of the dead little boy that we've come to know. The job of a film composer is often far more complex than I think most people, and even in many cases most filmmakers, realize. And so the setup of A Bridge Too Far, that is when we're first entering the picture, those of us who are going to see that movie, in many cases, especially if we haven't read the Cornelius Ryan book, think we're in for a traditional war movie experience. Only as the picture unfolds gradually do we realize that what we're looking at is a tragedy on a grand scale.
Any movement at Nijmegen?
None.
No way of blasting through to the bridge.
I'd lose all my men for nothing. There's God knows how many lying out there already.
The great thing about, especially the way we work in England, or certainly did then, when a camera operator works very, very closely with a director. So if you were dealing with Sean, that really is more, although he's man in charge, he's really more of an action man. So everything had, very often had fast counter tracks to make everything look more exciting. Whereas Ryan and Earl, who played Gavin, was more kind of more frantic as a person. I don't know if Gavin actually was, but certainly Ryan was. So we didn't actually go that way, with him. You do tailor your thinking and your shooting, obviously, to suit not only the mood of what you're filming, but the way the actor wants to portray it. Which, and I think in a film like this is fairly obvious. When you've seen them rehearse, you see that they don't want to do it. People always have this thing about the magic hour. When you just shoot that, which normally lasts about 10 or 15 minutes. So we had at the time, I guess Robert was probably the most expensive star in the world, especially for the short time we had him. So it took courage to go for that scene and do it. I really can't remember now. I think we did it in the evening, but it was quite a long time ago. And just get it, basically, we rehearsed so we knew how quickly we could shoot. And it just had that lovely look and also slightly haunting at what you were going into. And what a lot of those guys would have gone into in reality was the last day of their life, because when we did the crossing the Rhine, I travelled with Robert in the boat, and I was very happy there weren't live bullets the other side, because it was scary enough just doing what we did without actually a lot of Germans trying to kill us. So, it was something that Jeffrey and Dickie obviously talked through. They went for that look, and I think succeeded in doing it. The beginning of the film, obviously, they used the black and white actual footage. So what Jeffrey did, as we transposed from the black and white to the reality of our filming, it went through a kind of muted, shadowy feel. It wasn't nothing bright lit. The interiors really were lit through the windows, so it had a real feel of authenticity of being there at the time, as opposed to lots of front lit crap that people sometimes do. So it was, it'd been amazingly courageous if the film had been made in black and white, but I know that was suggested, but I don't believe that the studio would have put up with it. But I think that would have been I think it was the Longest Day was made in black and white, which I really, I still think makes you concentrate on what's happening rather than taking all the colours. I know it's stupid, war was in colour, but I don't know, because of all the photography, you always think of it as a black and white medium.
Where are those goddamn boats?
Boat crossing was interesting. Nijmegen, we did it over 3 Sundays. That was interesting, because with Robert Redford and all sorts of things. We did the rehearsals, which were actually quite funny, because we did the rehearsals, not with the actors and the rest of it. We went down there on a rehearsal day and we got the boats, the actual authentic boats, and no one had paddles, they all used their rifles, and we had about 100 people divided up into 4s or 5s in these boats. So, which I thought was really, really cool, because the military advisors were there, and everything was trying to be as authentic as possible. Well, the only thing no one had taken into account is that particular day, that particular time of day, because none of us were sort of seafaring folk, was the tide was quite strong. So there we were trying to get these boats from here to there, and they got in the water here, and they ended up down there, like 2 miles. By the time they managed to paddle across, it was and it was straight over there. So anyway, we got over that problem by including little inboard motors, which you don't see in the movie because they're inside, which gave them the direction and the power. And someone was steering it there, they were paddling, and it was all fine. It worked great. So we got everybody in it, and it was all, and we did over 3 Sunday mornings, because they closed Nijmegen Bridge, as you saw, and it was all closed, and we did this thing over 3 Sunday mornings. And the first Sunday morning we did it, we got in, we did the boat run first, run the rehearsals across, and it all fabulous. Got there, got out, fine. John Richardson, who you've spoken to, is a fabulous special effects guy, with explosions and bullet hits and machine gun raft, hits in the sand. It's big countryside and dunes and trees and a couple of buildings the other side with massive vista. So all these guys meant to get out the boats and run up the beach. A couple of machine gun posts the other side to give a bit of hostile fire, and there's obviously shelling going on from the friendly side over to them to give some sort of cover for our boys coming across. So on the rehearsal, fine, perfect. Why they went, right, come back, okay, right, turn over, great, lovely. So we got them across. It was perfect. They all got out, and then John lets off all these beautiful explosions and all the right time, and the boys are running up the beach, and it's absolutely fabulous. But it's a bit noisy. It's extremely noisy. Well, it's perfectly safe, but very noisy. So we did the first take, and it all looked great. Okay, well, we can just about have time to do another one. Bring all the boys back. They didn't have to paddle back. They came back in a bigger boat. Got it all going there. Paddled across, right? Guns going one way, paddles going another. As they all got out the other side, the first gunshot, 500 people all collapsed on the beach. They never went anywhere near the noise at all. One guy got killed, 500 people got killed with 1 bullet. They completely collapsed in it because they weren't going up there again, because it was pretty noisy and pretty hairy, but it still looked great. It was fabulous. Because we had so many cameras on it, it just worked a treat.
The Nijmegen Bridge crossing, again, that was pretty close to the Amersfoort, the 30th Corps breakout. A big effects preparation job. We had dozens of charges that had to be laid in on the shore of the river where they were rowing to. And this took, you know, sort of several days of preparation and digging and planting charges and getting everything ready there. We had the smoke situation where they were laying smoke to cover the river crossing. So we had huge fog machines actually on boats on the river, trying to create the curtain of fog across the water for the boats to be running through. We had explosions in the water, some of which were fired from the bank, and some were actually fired from the boats as they went across. And what we'd done is we'd pre-prepared high explosive charges with floats on, so that you could literally throw it in the water. The charge would drop and float at a predetermined depth, and they were on tethers of a predetermined length, so that the effects operator in the boat would wait until they were out to a safe position in the water. He could make sure there wasn't a boat directly behind him. He could drop his charge in the water. Once it was out and he could see that it was clear of his boat and clear of any other boats, he could connect the battery on, and then as soon as he was ready, either on a cue from me or a cue from a camera that was in his boat, he would be in a position to fire it. So that we had a pretty foolproof, fail-safe system for doing it. And I think if you watch the sequence as it happens, you see all the boats going across the water, you see the explosions on the bank, you see the tanks firing the guns, and then you see the explosions coming up in the water. It looks pretty impressive because there's so much of it, and it's obviously a difficult one to sort of engineer film-wise, certainly in a safe way. It was 100% safe. It certainly looked great when you were there. I can remember standing on the bank of the river, cueing all these things over the radio, because I got guys with radios in boats, guys on the shore, guys everywhere. As these charges were going off, I think because of the strata and the rock formations and the river as it was, the ground was shaking every time a charge went off, and it didn't matter if the charge was, you know, half a mile away on the other side of the river, the ground still shook. So we had probably in the course of 1 or 2 minutes 100 different charges going off, and the ground was constantly shaking, and watching the scene and feeling that, I mean, it was like being at war. It was quite an impressive few moments.
We planned like 7 or 8 cameras on the far shore, several on the shore we were leaving, and 2 or 3 cameras travel in the boat. So I had the privilege of traveling in the boat with Robert Redford. So we were all dressed up as Marines. I think he made a better Marine than I did. And off we went. And the only place Dickie Attenborough and Jeff and the others could watch from was way up in the embankment, at least half a mile away from where we were shooting, because we were shooting a 360-degree set. And Dickie couldn't come down for his last chat with Robert, which I hadn't realised. Anyway, we were getting ready, and we had like 14 or 16 little canvas boats, exactly as they were during the war, and each one had 10 or 12 soldiers in it. Mostly was either stunt guys or special effect guys. And I also had to watch very carefully, because 3 of these boats were towing dummy boats that were going to explode, but explode when I said over the radio to do it, because I wanted it, obviously, when the explosion to be in the same shot as I had Robert Redford. So we start clambering in the boats. You're all a bit apprehensive, because the River Rhine flows very fast, and it looked a long way down to the next stop, which had probably been somewhere in the Alps, I should imagine. We jumped in the boat, and as we did, we left shore, and we hit the tide, and every boat I've been watching changed places totally. So I had no idea then which was what boat, who was towing the explosive, who was doing this, Robert turned around to me, he said, I really didn't have a final chat with Dickie. I said, oh, I see. He said, what do you think my motivation is? I said, I have a feeling it's survival, Robert. And with that, the first explosion went, and I think he and I both knew it was. So these guys were rowing. We had a little motor in the boat, but it's really their rowing that took us through. And the other side, once I got things right, I would cue to Johnny the other side, and he would let some explosions go, so we always had them stacked up behind the boat, which I knew we would obviously cut to quite a bit. Then I had to pluck up the courage to think, now it's had a boat in front of me, because by now we are covered in smoke and water from different things. Is that the dummy boat just there? So I had to be brave and say, blow the first dummy boat. And luckily, each time we did that, it was a boat that wasn't that close to us, but gave us the effect. When we eventually arrived the other side, it was quite a long time to get across. It's a huge river, and the tide was very strong. I radioed across to Johnny just as we were arriving, because I was also operating, the camera with Robert big in foreground. And I said, Johnny, how many explosions? He said, I have 12 left. I said, save them. As we land, I'll try and get Robert to run up the beach, So, of course, by then your adrenaline is pumping so high. As we landed, I'm screaming. I felt like some sergeant screaming at Robert, go, go, go. And he just looked around and he went. And then we let the rest of the explosions go. Not dangerously, but, distance. And when Robert came back a few minutes later, it looked more like a scene from Tom and Jerry, because all I could see was his eyes. He was just covered in soot and dust and that. And he was a little bit angry, I must admit. And I was just, by then I hadn't realised, I was totally exhausted. I was just laying down in the boat with the camera in my hand, and Robert came back and he said, never in my life have I ever been through anything like that. So I said, no, nor have I, Robert. He said, it really is. I could see it, and I said, it's fantastic, isn't it? I said, because it was real. I said, on top of that, you were in picture the whole time. And any actor, he said, yeah, that's true. So the anger went. And he said, I know. I said, well, we got this. And then he got very, very excited, about the whole thing, because he knew no one's ever going to say that was a double, that was it. And the scene when we actually glided to the beach, when it was just so much like when you see the D-Day invasion, all those, it just had that real fantastic look of being there. It was, I think, an incredible sequence, and something that I think we were all very proud of, and looked marvellous. I mean, I just had that feeling of what war is like.
We had one take at 7 a.m. in the morning, so it meant we had to be out there from 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, which stopped all the boys going out on Saturday night, as I remember. But we used to have a 4 o'clock call. We'd get out there, we'd lay the charges, we'd be ready for 7 a.m. We'd get one take, and then we'd have to wrap up, take it all away, and come back next Sunday at 7 a.m. And I think we did that 3 successive Sundays. It was a hard sequence to shoot, but I think one of the probably one of the best explosive sequences that I've been involved in. The other part of it we achieved in a tank. We actually built a tank out near the main base in Daventer, which was 4 foot deep. We found a big concrete hard standing by the river and Peter Duclos built a 4 foot wall all around it, and we created our own tank. We then filmed all of the close work of the boats rowing and close shots of them being blown up. We blew boats up with dummies in, we blew boats up with real people in. We built huge underwater mortar pots that could sit on rubber car tyres on the bottom of the tank, that we could put explosive charges in. And I can remember doing the initial tests. I mean, the problem with doing explosions in water is that you get shock waves come through the water, and it can damage your kidneys, liver, sort of internal organs. So by putting them in steel mortar pots, we prevented the shock waves from getting to the actors. And I can remember we built these pots and put them in the water, and I went down there and put a rubber suit on, and we started firing them and getting closer and closer until you could start to feel things, and then back off a little bit. And We did it with, you know, actors and stuntmen, and it all worked pretty well.
It's working. I'm through to HQ.
There's one quite nice thing when Frost was being played by Tony Hopkins. We lined up a shot between the buildings, the bridge, you know, they're defending the bridge at Arnhem, and we lined up a tracking shot with Tony rushing headlong between the buildings, explosions and guns. And we did a take, and it looked really fantastic. And then General Frost said, "I never ran." And I thought, how can I believe this? And Dickie came, he said, you know, the General said he never ever ran. Well, we had a private with us, because fun enough, I think that was my idea to Dickie, saying, you know, the war is not always through officers' minds, you know, we should always have someone who was actually there on the ground, you know. I mean, this guy, Taffy something, who'd lost both his legs in Arnhem, he was with us, so for him it was fantastic, you know. And I went up to him and I said, very quietly, I said, you know, the General said he never ran. He said, oh no, he never ran. Sometimes he walked fast. But he said, you never run in front of a German. So this man didn't run. This General, who's still there with us now, was then, didn't run. He walked fast.
There's a moment where Hopkins is running across a street that's occupied by the Germans, and he's running and they're firing at him, and he makes it across the street. And General Frost was there that day, and I think Attenborough said, and he comments, and Frost said, well, I would never have run, because you don't want to show the Germans your contempt for danger. You want to show the Germans you're not afraid of them, so you walked. Well, you can't do that, because the audience will say, are you an idiot? Run! They're shooting at you. You can't make that work, I don't think. Frost was this incredible presence that gave the men tremendous confidence that they were going to survive. They were going to be okay. He was a great heroic figure, but he didn't do anything particularly heroic in the sense of Hollywood. And that was a huge problem for me, and we couldn't give him things he didn't do because Attenborough wouldn't have allowed that, and Frost was alive.
Our orders are to wait for the infantry. I'm sorry, but there it is.
I think we worked out, we issued, I can't remember, 350,000 weapons over the whole period of time, and we didn't lose one. We didn't lose one. They all came back. There was a massive logistical exercise. I think someone added up as well how many blank rounds we'd shot. So you'd have to check all the blanks that they were blanks, because who knows that when you're loading up blanks, someone's, you know, there's not the wrong thing got in, so they were all automatically checked. But it's just the logistics of getting large amounts of people there. We've done it. That's what you do on film. You know, it's a question of pre-rehearsal and organisation and just enough time to do it in. And of course, what would complicate matters somewhat is that you'd be shooting one sequence on a group of days that you'd booked all these people. Now, whether the weather changed it or the actors' availability changed it, or then you'd have to float that 1,000 people onto the following Thursday or the previous Thursday, or, you know, just generally juggle it around. But you have crowd coordinators and you have crowd marshals and all that sort of thing. It's not just us. There's a whole organisation behind the whole thing.
Always forgot the password.
We had some American tanks of our own, and we had the Dutch army tanks, which we used for the Germans. They were pretty impressive when they came over, and they drive through over anything, which they did on a couple of occasions. In fact, one clipped one of our buildings one day down under the bridge, and he just caught the front edge of it, but he caught the tube inside it, and I mean, the driver didn't know, and it was you know, like a feather to the tank. It just ripped the front of this building out, and one of my chaps was up on the upper floor working a fog machine, and he almost came out with it, as I remember. It was a scary moment.
There's one, I mean, the accidental featured quite large, really. There's a shot in the movie, as I remember, where a tank got a little too close to one of these plywood buildings and actually a German tank, and actually tears the side out of it. And as the thing falls, you can actually see the internal structure is just, 1 by 2 and 1/4-inch plywood and all the things it's not supposed to be. But actually, it's such an effective shot with this tank coming absolutely at you and tearing out the side of this building that you actually, I guess, don't, unless you know what it is, you don't analyze what the thing's made of. And there it is in the movie, this shot.
This was the last well-bred, noble, decent battle, I think, in world history. This was the last battle in which any of the notions of human decency applied. I mean, the Bulge was a dirty battle, which was the great battle after Market Garden. But this was the last time. I mean, there's a great scene, we didn't make it up, where the Max Schell character comes and says, "Will you surrender?" That happened. It was an amazing thing to do that. And then instead of, because there was nothing left. There was nothing left of the Brits at that point. They were just getting slaughtered.
Ihre eigenen Flugzeuge haben es gestern abgeworfen.
Before we did the big parachute drop, I'll probably never better go to Belgium now. The Belgian paratroops, I think did a drop for us for that, out of the back of a Hercules. So we're a bit nervous. We haven't done a parachute drop before, so we were there to do it. And what they do, Hercules comes over and they drop one guy out as a marker. No, that's not quite good. Come around again. Next guy drops out. That's no. And 3 times. The third time, they put the marker, the first guy, exactly where the centre of the zone should be. So next time round, they're all going to spill out the back of the Hercules. Obviously, we are framed with a camera underneath the Hercules, just so we get the guys spilling in the picture. So this is going to be easy. We've seen 3 goes at it, and the third one's there. Anyway, they all jump out the back, and we're all looking through our cameras. And about 5 guys fell into picture. When we looked round, we had our vehicles parked like a quarter mile behind us. They were covered in parachutists, because they misjudged so badly. They'd all landed in the car park. And that really made us scared. I mean, that's why, in a way, I could talk Dick into so many cameras when we did the big one, because this small one that was supposed to be so easy to do out of a modern aircraft with everything on your side had been a total muck-up. I mean, really scary. I mean, it was funny in a way, because you look there and there's all these guys sprawled over the catering centre. But it was really, a kind of reminder of what could happen in the film, and obviously what happens in the war, when especially doing this at night, So I apologise to everyone in Belgium if it wasn't the Belgium, but I've got a feeling it was they came to help us out that day. Olivia played the doctor, which was great, and Liv Ullmann played Kate the Horse, who was there. And when you met this woman, this Kate, I mean, God, you realise, she could have probably won the war on her own. This lady was fearless, and it was a great experience for Liv Ullmann to meet her. Jeff and I had done one film before with Liv, Abdication, so we knew her quite well. And I think Jeffrey had done 4 films with Olivia, and I certainly done 2 or 3, so we knew him quite well. And it was really wonderful to see them play these scenes when we had it as if the whole house, which was true, the hospital wasn't a hospital, it was a house where she kept all the wounded and was being bombed while they tried to operate and try and save kids' lives, And it was seeing those 2 together, because I think 2 of the best actors in Europe, without a doubt, or the world, was really wonderful, The sad thing, which didn't end up sad, was Olivia, during that period, was extremely ill. He'd already been through his bout of cancer, but then he had another disease which, when he left us, which I think was about week 3 or 4 of the film, he wasn't going to come back to about week 25, and he went into hospital for quite a long time. And I think all our fears were that we wouldn't see him again, because we had warned he really was extremely ill, and eventually, week 25, Olivia came back, and I guess he sensed, how worried we were, and he knew how worried I certainly had been. And he came up and he shook my hand, and he almost crushed my bones, because at one time, before he left us, he couldn't even hold the scalpel; it was just dropping out of his hand, which, for an actor like Olivia, was. So he came back. He didn't say, "I'm back, I'm better." He just shook your hand and he crushed it, And lunchtime, played cricket with us. So you knew he was back, and he was back for many, many more years, Because it was, but it was just so wonderful to see him, see him back and know that he survived. I'm sure he'd like to have maybe done some of those early scenes again, but they worked okay. It was just, he wasn't. I mean, the thing about those type of actors, all stage actors are so professional, they work at every single thing they're going to do, And of course, Olivia couldn't, because of having trouble holding things, he couldn't quite do, I'm sure, as he wished to have done. But the film looks great.
The Cape to Horst House barrage was, again, the set had been sort of pre-designed by Terry. We then came in and laid a number of explosions, both to just create explosive effects in the garden, and also to appear that even more of the house was being blown down. Again, this was creative. We had thousands of cork bricks made, and apart from ordinary cork debris, so we could literally blow up vast quantities of debris in the air that looked very real and weighty, but wouldn't hurt anybody when it landed on them.
No, I asked him to come over, but Dr. Spender does agree with me, sir. We've got to do something about them.
Yes, what? Good day, Doctor.
General, when you are a top-end actor or a very good or a very well-known person, I've never found them to be too much problem, because so long as you accord them the respect and the time that you would deal with someone like that, it's what I've found sometimes is the actors who are halfway there sometimes become a problem, because it's like, I've likened it to being a jockey. Because if you're a jockey and you own your own horse, it's no big deal when you get on it. So if you don't have a horse and you only get given a horse every now and then you tend to enjoy the horse a little more. But there wasn't one person who was any problem. They were all an absolute joy. And that, honestly, there wasn't one person who was a problem. All of them. They were absolutely fabulous.
How you manage that?
Attenborough's so passionate. He does bring a lot of passion and a lot of commitment to actually making a good movie. He really is story-driven. He knows his craft extremely well. What he's extremely talented at is picking some good people and leaving them alone to do their job. Letting them get on with their job because he trusts them. And then, he's clever enough to do that. Not I shan't say interfere, but get overly protective of what he wants from that person. If he's chosen someone to light it, then he'll let them light it. And obviously he's quite an adept technician, as well as a good politician with the actors. Being an actor himself, he understands them very quickly, but being a technician who's made as many films as anybody, he also knows what to do.
This again was a situation where we worked very closely with Jeff Unsworth, because Jeff wanted to use real flares to light the scene. So we had some huge flares made that were sort of 5-inch diameter, and we obviously couldn't hang them from parachutes because they'd drop far too quickly, and it'd all be over before we'd even rolled the camera. So we rigged the flares hanging from cranes, and then we rigged the rubber boats with bullets. And again, this was a mixture of a tank environment and a real river situation that we shot in Holland. The tank environment, I believe we shot mostly at the silent stage in Shepperton. The boats were pretty tricky to rig, because being rubber boats, you had to get squibs sort of inside the rubber to blow the holes in it. But I believe we got around that by sort of building a double-clad rubber with a sort of airbag inside that deflated, allowing us to squib the exterior and blow holes in it so that we could safely put actors and stuntmen in the boats rowing. The bullets would go off, the boats would deflate very rapidly into the water, the flares would be burning, you know, it all sort of came together.
There was an historic district of that town, Deventer, which was very precious. I mean, historically extremely important, highly protected. But again, it's a mark of the enthusiasm and generosity of the Dutch, really, in their attitude to this project, that they let us go in there with, you know, big earth-moving equipment, JCBs and so on, and we were able to dig bomb craters, shell craters, and deposit mounds and mounds and mounds of rubble. And it truly looks like, you know, it looks like Dresden and Cologne, and you know, and as I say, it was all done in that same town. It was very, very productive, that town, in every way.
Addison served as a tank commander during World War II. He landed at Normandy right after D-Day, and his unit was nearly wiped out. In fact, he was wounded, and he managed to save one other member of his tank crew, although he lost 2 others. Attenborough later said that he thought that Addison's music for A Bridge Too Far was in some way a kind of requiem for Addison's fallen comrades. Later on in the war, Addison served in Operation Market Garden, again as a tank commander. He recalled protecting one flank and being on the ground, not greatly involved in the fighting, he said, but he did recall what it was like to be in a tank moving along those bog-lined roads in Holland with no way of avoiding the anti-tank guns that he was facing. He later said that he toyed with the idea of using traditional regimental music, but discarded the idea in favor of writing his own score, his own marches, his own music as appropriate for the drama. It's the film composer's job to often do things that may not be obvious at first. Certainly when Addison saw this picture, and he was tremendously moved by it, and it not only brought back memories, but he saw the grand historical scale, the tragedy that this entire operation was. So the question then becomes, how do you score that? What do you do? It gives us a sense that great things are going to happen early on, and then when great things don't happen at the end of the picture, we feel an even greater sense of loss. And in part, that's because of what the music has set us up to expect.
You get a contingency of extras that love doing it, who are the high-end people who don't really need the money but just like the experience. You usually find they last about 2 or 3 days. And done this, bored with this, let's move on. And then you usually find a core of people who are doing it for the fun and the money. You know? So you get some wonderful finds in some of these extras. You get some wonderful characters. I mean, one bloke was with us, I think he was with us on week 2 and stayed all the way to the end. He was so good. Some of them were Dutch, some of them were English, some of them were German, some of them were, they came from all sorts of places because it was a job. You know, it was a reasonably paid job with food. And you know, you get those types of people who enjoy that sort of casualness about the whole thing.
There's a scene at the end when the 5 famous generals are standing up looking off, and that was in a church. And we went to the top, Attenborough, and we were looking for the shot. We walked up the church. It was a small staircase. And I got my first and only case of height fear. And it was a tiny little inside, there were no windows, there was no way to fall. And I remember panicking. And I remember crawling down on my butt like a little baby does, all those stairs, and then getting to the bottom of the church and racing across the church And then I wouldn't stop for about 100 yards till I was I'd never had that. I don't know if it was a panic attack or what. A lot of people have a fear of heights. I don't, but I did that day. Never get over it. I can still remember myself running out of the church, and I wouldn't allow myself to stop for a long way.
Well, that's it then. We're pulling them out.
Mr. Levine was retired. He wanted to come back. For whatever reason, he decided to come back with a bridge too far. He spent his own money. It was his money. There was no studio money behind it. And when he went to Hollywood for that week to raid to get all the stars, the agents did not believe him. They did not think he was going to be able to pull it off. So they made him pay for the actors in advance, which killed him, because it was millions of dollars he planned on giving the actors when they came and acted, not 6 months before, a year before, whatever it was, because the movie might not happen. So he was out more and more and more, millions of dollars of his own money. And he was rich, but he wasn't that rich. If the movie had been a disaster, he would have been fine, but he wouldn't have been a rich guy anymore.
We've been given our marching orders. If they discover we're leaving, they'll go all out to destroy us. So we must...
The critical reaction in this country, and there were a lot of good reviews, but I think basically the fact that they said the movie was not accurate, the fact that they said the movie was in a sense phony, which it was not necessarily valid criticism on this particular project, damaged it because it was a depressing movie. You had to want to see this movie, to go see this movie, because it was not a great, heroic, isn't it wonderful, isn't war great, didn't we defend ourselves magnificently, aren't we a fabulous nation, all of which is true. This particular story was bleak and sad, and the story they chose to use was a failure. The episode was a failure. When you have a movie like A Bridge Too Far, which was such a gamble and wanted to be wonderful, and I thought in many ways was wonderful, you want it to find an audience. And when it doesn't, that's very sad. And you never get over it.
This is Urquhart's retreat. It was raining heavily. We shot this for real in a location in Holland. We had smoke and fires and flares burning over the brow of the hill, and guns that fired charges of aluminium powder over the horizon, so that you saw distant flashes of, supposed to be artillery in the distance. A lot of heavy rain, which was, using just standard water and pumps and rain jets and things. And again, it was just a lot of it. The key to a good rain scene, night or day, is how the DP lights it, and as long as you get good sort of three-quarter backlight on it, it shows up a treat. I mean, I've seen rain before where you've had a deluge there, and not a bit of it photographs. So working together is a major key with that. That's a classic example of the atmosphere and the colour of smoke and the burning tyres, and what we were striving for all the time was reality. So if we could create a real fire and get real wood burning and sparks, we would add things to that to create smoke colours. We would put an overall atmospheric smoke down that would fill the entire screen area, and then within that we'd create other fires and smoke that would give it the life.
funnily enough, if you go back, and the interesting thing I find now is you go back just on the, well, lots of the big films we did, but if you just go back on the unit list of Bridge Too Far, all the people on that are now Oscar-winning experts. You know, they're all talented people. I mean, look at Stuart Craig. He was the assistant art director on Bridge Too Far. He's won 3 Oscars now. Charming man. He's doing the film we're on now, Harry Potter 1 and 2. You've got John Richardson. He's been around he's done Bonds and all sorts of things since then. His floor crew, John's floor crew, consisted of 5 of the major special effects supervisors on the floor today. So they're the guys he had on the floor then. So they've progressed since then. So special effects, art department, loads of other people. I mean, they've all progressed onward and become very famous in their own right. Peter MacDonald, for instance. Yeah.
How are you? I'm not sure that I'll know for a while. But I'm sorry about the way it worked out.
The idea of the parachute drop was obviously to take bridges, hold them for a short amount of time until the tanks came through, held the bridges, they couldn't be blown up, and end the war several months earlier, which would mean several 100,000 more people would live. But it didn't work out. Had it succeeded, the war could have well been cut short, you know. Had the tanks got through, had the Germans not had that crack Panzer division just in the woods opposite, you know, all these things would have helped to end the war a little earlier and save a lot more lives, you know. So it was an incredible effort, but it was, I guess, a glorious failure. It's a victory in bravery that these guys die for their belief, mostly very young men. But unfortunately, like many times in war, not badly led in the front, because people like Frost and Urquhart, they're fantastic people. But the people back home hadn't really thought it out. And I think it comes off in the film. I mean, Dickie doesn't hit you over the head with it, but I think you have to be an idiot to not know at the end that you have to salute the bravery, but you should be very annoyed that it's happened. And it's happened again many times since to us, the Americans. I mean, people don't seem to learn by their mistakes, you know. While as young men they can sacrifice, they still get sacrificed, you know. So I think the most poignant scenes of the film are the very end scenes, when what were left of troops just waiting for the Germans to come and capture them. So you see people looking after each other who fought bravely much longer than they were supposed to, without any help that was supposed to come to them. You saw remnants of, like, I think there was a flute that you knew belonged to one of the guys who hadn't made it. You recognise very few faces now, because the faces you knew were all dead. And it was just the kind of the hopelessness of war. You fought, you've lost. It's not like a soccer match, you know. A lot of men have died, as always in war, unnecessary. But and I'd always, I always said to Attenborough, that was when he asked once about. I said that to me was my favourite. We did the beginning of the sequence. We just panned slowly over these guys, and by then, this was, I don't know, week 20 of the film, and we had what was called Attenborough's Private Army, which are a group of, I don't know, 30 young actors who had become soldiers over the period of the film. They were trained as soldiers, were marched to work and back again, understood what they were portraying. So they knew what they had to be, because they'd been through it up to a point. So that was a kind of very touching, very tear-jerking scene, The end scene when he and Liv are pulling a cart and trying to just going away from the battle zone. And the plan was I was tracking in front of him, and after a certain cue, I was going to track faster and faster and they would retreat into the background and make it smaller and smaller. So we started this, and we knew that Olivia, although he was back, still wasn't a well man. And so we started tracking with him, and as always, like Olivia, he kept exactly where he should be, the distance from camera. But when I started to accelerate, he kept up with us. By now the grips are pulling the camera so fast, and Olivia and Liv are running with this cart. And at the end of it, he said, oh, he's all over. He said, Peter, it's very hard. I said, well, you weren't supposed to keep up with us, Larry. We were supposed to let you retreat into the distance. He said, well, no one told me that. So I said, well, we'll probably go again when you get your breath back. But it was just wonderful. Was a lot of younger actors were just, oh, I'm out of here. It's just stupid. I can't keep up. He was just so professional that he was determined. If it was his last shot of the film, last shot in history, he would make it work. So he was to me one of the greatest experiences of my life. Having done 3 or 4 films with him was really marvelous. It was, I think Dickie's thing was to dedicate it to all those young kids that died, and hopefully that's what people will remember the film for. A lot of very brave young men that died for a good reason, but not as well informed as they should have been.